I'm Nat.
And I'm Guy. And this is the channel that we focus on everything Alberta independence, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays live. Today happens to be Tuesday, so we're going to give updates on Alberta independence before we go into geopolitics. Geopolitics today has a lot to do with Alberta because it's oil, oil, oil. Whether it's Iran, Venezuela, the United States, everybody is involved in these oil wars, and that definitely has a big benefit for Alberta if oil prices go up.
And it's also important to stay up to date with what's happening globally because a lot of the things impacting Alberta and or Canada are also impacting and being implemented in many other countries as well. And people think it's an isolated issue, but it's more of a coordinated issue. So I do think it's important to continue to do these geopolitic shows.
For years, that's what we covered was geopolitics. We started with Canada, the truckers' protests, did the March Across Canada, worked with Billboard Chris. Then we fled Canada because I lost hope in all national leadership of Canada. That's why I'm so in favor of this Alberta independence movement, and I really do hope it's a success. We already made our decision to leave. We currently live in Mexico, and with these mass censorship bills coming into Canada, that means we're going to be able to keep talking about Alberta independence, even when the government comes to start arresting people for memes and content creation.
Yes.
Okay. Let's get.
But before we start, thank you for being with us today. Please do subscribe if you haven't, because we are trying now to get to 2,000 subscribers. So thank you to everyone that has subscribed up to now. It really does help us out, and it's free. So if you want to support us, that's one way to do it. And also, we read all your comments. So please do let us know what you think. It makes the show actually worth it to be live. Otherwise, we could just record it previously, and we love to read and know what you are thinking and saying.
And I was talking way too fast yesterday. I was gathering Alberta independence stories all weekend long, and it gets me it's the one subject that always kind of gets me going. So I had so much to say on it, and I watched it back. I was like, wow, I was talking fast. Okay.
And also, good day to Lyle Norman. That whenever anybody says good day, it reminds me of that show you play every day. When they say good day, today is March 10th, blah, blah, blah.
The Duran and Alexander McCurris I watch a lot of.
Okay,
let's hit breaking news then.
Well, I think it's Alberta first. Related,
no, it's breaking news first.
Okay, oh, sorry. Hold on. Okay, let's just start here. From Marty Up North, quote, I just...
Well, you can't hit the breaking news button?
Okay, fine, hold on.
I'm angry. I've had enough of these people.
I pressed the wrong one. Should I press the other one?
Let's just go into the stories today. She's having some technical issues.
Well, we haven't used the buttons in a long time.
On our normal geopolitical show a few months ago, we used to have sections and buttons for them, but we haven't used them, so we'll just go with it today.
No, let me do the breaking news.
Okay, a lot of the breaking news is Alberta related today.
Extra, extra, read all about it. Extra, extra, read all about it.
And there we go. That is the actual one. So there we go. From Marty Up North, quote, he says, quote,
and one moment before you read this. I've kind of been asking and wondering where the signature count is. I think it's crucially important. Marty doesn't know any more than anybody else knows, but he did some basic math, and this is where he thinks it is around. So let's see what he has to say. And I'm glad he did something like this. This can give a little bit of direction to people getting signatures.
So it says, I adjusted to a more realistic 70-30 model, assuming we have highly motivated volunteers. This represents a moderately skewed distribution, common in many real-world efforts like sales teams or petition drives, where the majority still comes from a minority, but the productivity tail is longer and more substantial than in stricter 80-20 models. Because I'm using a formula to model the distribution, the numbers don't add up exactly to 500,000 signatures. That's because, in theory, there's a very long tail to the distribution. The model also doesn't define how long of a time period the collection goes on, but the point is still valid because he had said that tried to illustrate how many signatures have been gotten up to now.
Yeah, and it looks like at the low end we should be or hopefully sitting by his modeling at around 350,000. That's around the minimum I thought we were going to need to kind of be safe.
Make a point.
Because a lot of these signatures are going to be invalidated if people signed twice, or if there were people that got badges that were trying to get fake signatures and submit them. Any number of reasons, a lot of signatures will be invalidated. So it's good to see that the estimates are well up there. That doesn't mean that we kind of slow down. We want to speed up and kind of push it even harder. We want to send a message. If we're at 350,000, that's really close to 500,000. And I think 500,000 sends a real message, especially considering this is just a fraction of the amount of time we were supposed to have. And this was the hardest time to gather signatures for Alberta independence because the weather is just now starting to warm up. Okay, so this was great news, and I just had to report on it today. That's why I made it the opening story. Okay, let's go into the other breaking news we have, though.
Yes, from Mark Nixon, also in Canada, quote, the Liberals just censored their censorship bill. With help from the Bloc Québécois, they ended debate and forced it through Parliament. A very bad day for free expression in Canada. Bill C9 will jail you for the crime of creating a meme. Welcome to communism.
Yeah, this is absolutely horrible. This was the censorship bill we were talking about. I'm expecting it to pass probably on Friday or maybe at latest sometime next week. I was wondering who was going to team up with the Liberals to push this through because the Liberals have a minority government. Now we see it's the Bloc. The Bloc also, a lot of the separatist parties in Quebec that are taking power originally said by the end of the year they were going to have a vote for separatism. Now they're saying 2030, and they seem to be much more in line with the Liberal Party, which is a little bit funny. There may be some backroom deals being made there. They don't want the Quebec separatist movement going on the same time as Alberta independence because it really shines a light on how the federal government treats the two movements differently.
And it still has to go through a few more layers, but because there's this partnership, and also because we know the sentiments and intentions of both the House of Parliament, then it's basically done.
Yeah, and this has been the big story we have been talking about most of last week when it first came up, that it looked like this bill was going to pass. The UK, the EU, Australia, all the other Western countries, except for the United States, are the one country that seems to really respect free speech at this point. All the other countries have implemented far more draconian laws. Canada's trying to, they divided their major bill up into 3 separate bills. This is the first one they're going to push through. They're going to push it through because there's most likely going to be a snap election. After that snap election, if Carney wins a majority, you're going to see the other 2 censorship bills get shoved in there. And the main target is going to be Alberta independence at that point, if Carney can get a majority. This is why if you do live in Alberta, even if you don't necessarily like Pierre Poilievre or the National Conservative Party, you might want to consider reluctantly voting for him, because if Carney is held to a minority, it's going to be much harder for him to derail the Alberta independence movement. Okay.
And we're already seeing other attempts, and with what's happening in British Columbia too, with the First Nations, there are already other attempts to try to halt what's happening in Alberta.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of get into that with Canadian news today. It's very interesting what happened generally on a national stage in Canada, and we rarely have an opportunity to talk national news because there has been so much Alberta independence news. But the next story is related to the one we just showed.
From Ned Kirk, says, quote, terrible news. The Liberal government has just successfully censored their censorship bill by working with the Bloc Québécois to end committee debate and ram the bill through Parliament. Conservatives will continue to fight for religious freedoms. We'll see.
Yeah, this was the first step. They wanted to end any debate on the bill. And in order to do that, they were going to have somebody kind of concede to the bill. It was obviously the Bloc. That same party is the one that's going to help push through the bill in the end. So I don't see any roadblocks kind of left to stop this bill.
Folks, we just got some horrible news. A motion was passed. We were defeated in the House of Commons. The Liberals and Bloc Québécois have teamed up, and essentially the motion that was passed will end committee debate on Bill C9. This is the one that infringes on religious freedoms, and now they will try to ram it through Parliament. But Conservatives will continue fighting, and we hear all the faith groups and all the Canadians out there that have voiced their concerns about Bill C9 and its infringement on religious freedoms. Folks, we just...
Yeah, and they keep talking about faith groups, and I do appreciate that because it can spark a lot of outrage and get some support. That being said, we've seen similar bills internationally in other similar Western countries, and they didn't seem to have a willingness to point out this is a political tool to shut up people on social media, even to shut up other political parties from talking about certain subjects like immigration. In the EU, they used a similar bill to say it was hate speech to talk about immigration, and a lot of parties had to take that off of their platform.
Which is insane. And again, it's if you put everything, if you add 2 + 2 + 2, it comes out to they're trying to stop Alberta independence.
Yeah. and that's going to be the ultimate thing here. And I really think if Mark Carney gets a majority government, and he has two ways at this point, if he wins these by-elections or if he doesn't win all three by-elections, he's just going to call a snap election. And he seems to be extremely ahead in the polls right now. Once he gets that majority, it's game on for him. He's going to be able to do whatever he wants. And we know what he wants to do because they've already written up the legislation. What's been holding him back is the fact that he has a minority at this point.
But Canada itself today woke up to some interesting news as well from Toronto. From Nick Sortor, quote, multiple shots were fired targeting the U.S. consulate in Toronto, Canada, per police. Luckily, nobody was injured. Canada's immigration issue is arguably even worse than the U.S.'s. We're going to need a northern border wall at some point. And yes, Canada continues to let in who knows who.
Well, and there's a ton of anti-American sentiment kind of developed in Canada through Mark Carney on a national level.
Even further.
Mark Carney have kind of stole the idea of nationalism away from Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives and made it this social liberal idea now. And that's why you see the Liberals waving Canadian flags rather than the Conservatives. Patriotic Conservatives wave the Albertan flag now. And that's why they're targeting the U.S. Embassy here. It's because of the amount of negative sentiment put through by the national media and backed up by the federal government.
And a lot of people, I saw a lot of discourse. Do you want to see the video or no?
You can just play it really quick so we can see Toronto there. Okay, and that's good. And I'm not exactly sure where the American consulate is. I know a lot of consulates are in high-rise buildings. Mm-hmm. I think they may have a street-level entrance for that particular building.
Maybe, but
if somebody does know that's in the chat, kind of let us know. Because if it isn't a high-rise building and they didn't directly target the American embassy, but a group of businesses, I think that's less concerning, but I think it was an actual standalone building.
And I've seen a lot of confusion about embassy versus consulate. Is it foreign territory? Is it not foreign territory? I had a lot of friends that worked at the Mexican consulate in Vancouver, and consulates, and I learned through them, consulates are essentially the territory of whatever country they are. So once you step through that door, you are essentially in the U.S., basically.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I just
so
thought that
jurisdiction
was
is interesting when it comes to attacks or to things that happen specifically to the consulate, for example, or the embassy. But it seems to be pretty much the same idea.
Well, and the Canadian response to this and the police response, I didn't grab it, but they don't know what's going on. I mean, a lack of information they basically have is crazy. Once we get into the Canadian stories today, they're directly refusing to share information about things that are happening in the Western Hemisphere, about drug boats and things like that. This is crazy. They're refusing to share it with the U.S. This is not going to help trade relations. Canada, if they don't get this tariff deal, is going to be in a real bad situation. They should be doing everything they can to improve relations with the U.S. I was watching a liberal show earlier. I think it's called The Line. I love watching liberal shows just because it infuriates me and I start yelling at the TV and I start debating with them even though they can't hear me. But that being said, these liberals are well aware of the relationship Canada has built with the U.S. over 2 decades, and it's a relationship of usury. I mean, Canada has tariffed the shit out of the United States for decades. Well, the United States didn't do it in recourse, not nearly to the extent until very recently. Now, these liberals are saying, well, why are they doing this to us when they literally just stated they were doing the same to the U.S. long before they ever did? They also just wish the U.S. would go back to the old relationship. That's not the case. They want to make a fair playing field, and they want to increase the amount of pie for all the countries in the Western Hemisphere, but they're going to need a coalition of people. The Shield of the Americas is what Donald Trump is trying to make. He recently had a meeting of that group, and Canada was not invited.
No, but Canada wasn't invited, Mexico wasn't invited, Colombia wasn't invited, and Brazil wasn't invited. So essentially just the liberal, quasi-communist, quasi-dictatorships of the American continent.
Well, I will kind of put a caveat in that,
Yeah.
and that is Mexico, I think, wasn't invited not because Sheinbaum's not cooperating, because she is behind the scenes. Now in the media, Trump is allowing her to say what she wants because she's a far left ideologue and she has to play to her base. But behind the scenes, militarily, economically, she's doing everything to cooperate, and she's reaping big benefits economically for Mexico right now. That being said, I know there was some incidents over last week we didn't have a chance to talk about because we didn't talk geopolitics that much, but I believe it was Nicaragua, Colombia, and one other country was involved in strikes that were cooperated by the country itself and the U.S.
In coordination.
In
with-
coordination
Yeah, here in
with.
Mexico as well, they apprehended a bad guy.
Yeah, a lot of what's going on in Central and South America right now, going after organized crime, is just not being reported because Iran is taking all of the headlines, and there is a ton of operations going on. We're centralized out of Mexico now that we fled Canada a few years ago. And so we get all this information, and it's surprising how this did not make international news, especially the fact that they had the meeting or the Shield of the Americas, and then all these strikes took place as well.
And that's why I said, I think it was last week when we had our debate on Iran, that I'm not sure if they were planning on doing both Iran and maybe starting to come into Latin America, Mexico, etc. at the same time. But I think the opportunity came up, or the Israel came up, where they had to continue to finish off essentially in Iran and then
We'll
come over here.
get into Iran in a little bit. I kind of divided things up geopolitically. I don't want to hit on that subject at the beginning of the show yet, though.
Yes. Moving on to Alberta.
Because some of the biggest news is coming out of Iran, but the waters are very muddled. So I want to combine Iran news with U.S. news.
And we don't have a button for Alberta yet, but I will make one over the weekend for these geopolitics shows. But now let's move on to there from the Western Standard
So
quote.
this is just going to be a short update on all the big things that happened in Alberta from yesterday. And there was quite a bit of news.
So from Western Standard, quote, Alberta Chiefs and NDP gather at Alberta leg as UCP dismiss motion for non-confidence vote.
Yeah, and just I'll caveat this section really quick. A lot of people may be tuning in that don't normally watch our show. Typically, we talk a lot about Alberta independence. It's probably the biggest issue outside of Iran going on right now because it can change the political paradigm between governments and their citizens. If Alberta separates, I think you're going to see other regions like the EU, possibly even Central and South American countries follow in their footsteps. Also, other provinces. So this whole section involves Alberta independence, and the station in general focuses mainly on that issue. This channel
in general. But we are seeing, and especially because it would create a paradigm shift regarding this relationship between countries and their citizens and the ability of citizens to essentially dictate if they want to become a country or not, it is also important for other places that right now are in similar conflict.
And you didn't take down that story, did you?
Yes.
Okay, don't take down the story.
Sorry.
I didn't address the story yet, but that's all right. The next story is related, so it's going to be fine.
From Marty Up North, quote, says, this guy is insufferable, and I agree. Nineshi, if you think 12 unelected hereditary chiefs are going to prevent millions of Albertans from exercising their democratic voice, I have news for you.
Well, this is political theater between the NDP and these tribal elites. People that actually exist within the tribe, the members of the tribe, not the elites of the tribe that are working hand in hand with the government, I think feel a much different way. They're much in favor of Alberta independence if you poll them. That being said, I don't know if I necessarily agree with Marty Up North, especially when I see what's going on in BC. It's absolutely crazy the amount of power they've given these tribes to derail and go around the governance of Canada. I wouldn't be surprised in short order if we see BC tribes trying to claim land within Alberta, and that would be kind of a way around of the tribes within Alberta that have already ceded their land. Let's see this press conference they had. This was a lot of hard words and a lot of lies he's using. You're just seeing them start to ramp up by putting tens of millions of dollars into opposition parties, opposition NGOs, individuals. We profiled unions on our last show. The government is starting to put a lot of money into this to try to derail Alberta independence.
You're bound by treaty. So 3 things happened today in the legislature that I want people to understand, and they are important. The first is that the UCP admitted that the entire separatist question is a charade. They said over and over again that they will not allow a referendum question to go forward that is unconstitutional. So all those poor volunteers gathering signatures in places like Yuma and Puerto Vallarta, perhaps they should listen to the Premier who says she's not going to put the question on the ballot no matter how many signatures you get, because it's unconstitutional. We've always known this, but it was amazing to hear them admit it today.
And that's an absolute lie. The fact that the way the question is actually modeled, word for word, was modeled after clarity and how previous questions were modeled. So legally, they worded the question in a very specific way, which Danielle Smith has already agreed to put on the October 19th ballot if there is enough signatures. He's trying to feed disinformation and lies to moderates in the general public that maybe aren't as politically savvy as a lot of our audience.
The second thing that happened that was important today is to see how unbelievably unprepared this government was to talk about treaty issues. They mouthed pretty words. The Premier, a claimant to Indigenous ancestry herself, talked about how the Indigenous people love them. They talked about meaningless things in great meetings.
And it's very interesting. He's giving up or talking about Indigenous rights, Indigenous treaties, considering what's going on in BC. And one of his party mates in the NDP runs BC right now. That's David Eby. His polling numbers are absolutely falling off a cliff within BC because he's opening the door to get rid of all private property rights, not only within BC, but setting that precedent in BC. They're going to be able to take that all the way across Canada. We recently did a video called Land Grab BC and Alberta. I highly recommend watching it. It kind of shines a little bit more light on the issue.
And then again, with the pressure that is being put on the actuality that Alberta might be able to become independent being put on the federal government, I wouldn't, and we've talked about this as well yesterday, I wouldn't put it past them trying to say that because BC First Nations used to hunt, for example, in places and within Alberta, they also have a land claim there, and then muddy the waters even further by doing that. So
yeah, that's how a lot of these Indigenous tribes within BC were able to have this land grab of Greater Vancouver and a lot of other areas. It's not because they lived in those areas, but they said they hunted in those areas. So there's no reason why tribes that were bordering Alberta are not going to try to put land claims in once BC is successful. I really see a lot of what's going on in BC being put in by the NDP as a way to block any independence movement from kind of rising in BC because there's too many invested interests and too many layers of government there. Mm-hmm. You have the UN, you have the provincial government, the federal government, you have multiple tribes with land grabs on the same land, and then you have private citizens as well.
But we also have this from Alberta Proud Dad about that same thing. He says, looks more and more like yesterday's chaos in the Alberta legislature wasn't spontaneous at all. Break protocol, disrupt the chamber, hold a press conference, blame your opponents, classic political theater. Albertans are starting to see through it. And yes, I really do hope so because it's becoming way too transparent at this point.
Yeah, and he does have a First Nations card and he is in with the First Nations somewhat. So he does know the feelings on the ground from a lot of First Nations members, not elites within the tribe working with the federal government. And he talks about that in just a little bit.
Indigenous leaders who spoke outside the legislature all expressed disappointment in the UCP and said trust has been broken.
How the UCP are conducting themselves when it comes to our people, when we see firsthand how they work together to minimize our rights.
You got to love the mainstream media and how they spin and contribute to sowing division in this province. It is clear as day that Nahedanenchi and First Nations groups got together, planned this in the legislature so they could put a photo op together and put on a show for Albertans.
Order. This is the people's house. Go ahead. Yes, all peoples.
The thing is, it didn't work. I've been getting comments like this since I posted my video. First Nation chiefs do not speak for me, and I'm First Nations. What does that show you? That shows you that not only are they trying to sow division within Albertans, they're trying to sow division within their own First Nation communities. This is irresponsible governance at a First Nation level and at an NDP opposition level. Nahedanenchi, take your photo op and shove it.
Yeah, in order to stop Alberta, if they do get independence from becoming BC, and a lot of other countries around the world, this is happening in Central America, South America, Europe, you name
Australia.
it. The UN has basically written international laws when it comes to Indigenous people or First Nations, one in the same, and they're using these laws in Chile. They're using them in BC. BC is really the spearhead at which they want to set the example because the people are so compliant and have been so brainwashed over the last decade. They think it's going to be the easy mark. Once it goes through there, they're going to spread it out everywhere else. But kind of like what I was saying, if Alberta gets independent nation status, you're not going to want any specialty groups. Otherwise, this same thing is going to happen even if the land is ceded. I guarantee you there's going to be ways around it. So what you're going to want to do to get rid of specialty groups is you have your Albertans and you have your First Nations. First Nations typically have more rights than Albertans. What you want to do is not take away First Nations rights because that's going to hinder you in debates and when it comes to the media. What you're going to want to do is increase Albertans' rights so they have equal rights to First Nations. And once everybody has equal rights, you no longer have specialty groups within the eyes of the law. And this is where it really comes down. When you have specialty groups in the eyes of the law, you can bring in compelled speech laws, hate speech laws, group rights laws, property rights laws. All this stuff is up for grabs and it's being weaponized by the UN on an international level and then being adopted by federal governments. They're working hand in hand with Indigenous groups and First Nations right now.
Yep, with programs and institutions like UNDRIP and UNDRIPA, which both come from the UN and are doing exactly this and consulting and even pushing for more of these land grabs and private property grabs. Mm-hmm. We all know why, because it's easier to control people if they do not own anything and if they're happy. But I will say also with this, it's interesting that for the longest time, I will say, and again, I lived in Canada for 13 years and I saw it ramp up as the land acknowledgements got more and more, and the conversation, I will say, around First Nations, etc., ramped up again as well, I think. You have to look at it through a place of no emotion. You can't, because that's what the Liberals and that's what some of the Conservatives have done. They're looking and they're speaking about this issue all just through emotion without putting up the actual facts and the actual consequences of the bills and the laws and the things that they're passing and the privileges that are being put upon a certain sector of citizens and not the rest.
Well, I would say much how the Canadian federal government has been using Albertans as the doormat and the piggy bank for the rest of Canada. Something similar has been happening with the elites in these tribes, working hand in hand with the government and then treating the tribal members like a doormat, much like Canada looks at Alberta, which is absolutely ridiculous at this point.
I mean, and right now with Naneshi, we can clearly see it, in that case provincial, but the federal government is using First Nations to do and continue to enact whatever they want.
Well, yeah, it gives them plausible deniability.
And emotional virtue signaling as well.
Yeah.
Because you can never go against it because it's one of those third rails in Canada you cannot touch or speak up against.
Well, we do have good news coming in later. What's happening in British Columbia, finally, the stripping of private property rights is having an emergence of the NDP voters coming over to the Conservative Party because the Conservative Party seems to be the only one even giving lip service to protecting private property rights. And that's really what it is at this point, because I don't think the Conservatives can win a majority government. And that's the big issue right now. And that's why Alberta independence is so important. Without a majority government, you're not going to be able to make the changes necessary to get Canada even steered in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Let's read some comments if we can.
Sure.
And thank you for everybody that has left comments and has supported the channel lately. The increase in subscribers is really helping our reach get out more for these lives, especially on our Monday, Wednesday, and Friday lives, where we have a lot of important information. We kind of put it out about Alberta independence and the petition that's currently going on.
Yes, Lyle Norman says, I heard fuel price dropped here in Alberta from yesterday. It's been going like this.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting because I think we're going to see a lot of countries, fuel prices dropped on the market, but we're going to see if the price actually drops at the pump. Mm-hmm.
Lyle Norman says the world is watching Alberta independence, and exactly, and I think that should be encouraging to Albertans that a lot of people that are in the know are very interested, even from outside of Alberta or Canada, and to get that message out there because that support will become increasingly more important as as we always say, censorship bills come in, but also as the momentum starts to build up further and further.
Well, yeah, also, I'm the one that kind of arranges the stories. I front-loaded a little bit of Alberta and Canada, but a lot of the geopolitics today have to do with Alberta because it's countries that are engaged in an oil war. We have information about Venezuela, the United States, Iran, as well as Cuba. I almost made Cuba, though, the headline story, but I think oil prices are more related to Alberta. And I would say the rest of Canada is going to suffer with high oil prices, but this is great for the Alberta independence movement. It may hurt your pocketbook in the short term, but I think it strengthens the independence movement overall because it gives moderates that may not be as politically or economically aware of what's going on that, yeah, Alberta it has a secure economy, not just in oil, but a lot of other natural resource sectors.
And Sean, hello, Sean, says, also they look ridiculous. I doubt that's close to how people looked prior to 1492.
Well,
with all the chiefs in the background.
Well, they looked a lot like Trudeau when he put on Indian face instead of his black face.
Essentially.
He had two Indian faces.
Yeah.
He had his tribal headband.
Both sectors.
And then when he went to India, he dressed up like that too.
Dot and feather.
Well, Pierre Poilievre does that once in a while too, and it kind of gets under my skin.
And that's what I was saying. In Canada in general, both conservatives and liberals have been propagandized with this so much and turned it into such an emotional third rail issue. You cannot be forward with it and you cannot be truthful with it anymore, which I think is what's needed the most, but most Canadians are too afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit when we get into Professor Party. He got a bad rap, I think, about 8 or 9 months ago. This is becoming one of the main issues globally, not just in Canada, but because it's happening in BC, Albertans can now see this, and that this is an issue that kind of needs to be talked through, especially before the birth of your nation, if you want to have a secure constitution and constitutional rights.
Equal for everybody.
Equal for everybody, yeah.
And Ron, hello Ron, says click that like button. Thank you so much. And I'll say subscribe as well. We're trying to get to 2,000 subscribers, but also go follow the Bradley's Fun at Follow the Bradley's Fun with Ron. And he talks a lot about entertainment and parks and etc. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, you're usually on WDW Pro with Ron.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I probably will be this Thursday. I should be on WDW Pro to talk entertainment news, which there is a lot right now. As well,
yeah,
which
especially because Paramount Plus.
Yeah,
we used to talk a little bit of entertainment news a couple times a week, but it kind of died out, and then geopolitics is just blowing up, and then now with Alberta independence. I really want to talk about what's going on with that every single day. This is one time as a political commentator, you can have a massive impact in the world. What you say could really affect that vote. And if that vote goes the right way, the paradigm between governments and their citizens will change.
But I do, if I ever do get enough time in my day to be able to do it, I'd love to go back to talking more about cultural issues, like cultural war and wokeness within the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
So if I do ever find time, we might do that as well.
Well, and the issue of wokeness has literally died down a little bit. Wokeness and
but it won't.
Yeah, but wokeness and culture were connected at the hip there for a little bit. But I think the liberals, and especially in the United States, realized they're losing a lot of these issues. Let's just be quiet about them until we can try to win again.
Until they try to push through Gavin Newsom. But
yeah.
We'll talk about more of that when we get to the U.S.
Well, I took out a story about his wife and how she's laundering all kinds of millions of dollars through Newsom.
Allegedly.
And grants, yeah.
But let's move on to, you touched on Professor Party. That sounds weird. You talked about Professor Party, and there was a debate that was all around Alberta independence, put up by Harrison Faulkner with Jason Kenney and Professor Bruce Party. And it was interesting to see where a lot of people that do support Alberta independence fell within these two Ontarians, I would say.
We've been talking about the trailer for this and when it was coming up. Then I watched it, but there was no real clips available. Finally, they're starting to put clips out. I thought we would show a clip today because although a lot of Albertans didn't like it because it's two Ontarians talking, Professor Party did a fantastic job representing. I must watch 3 or 4 hours of debates daily. And so I know when I see a good debater, good talking points, and Jason Kenney prepared for an economic debate, and he even lost on the economic points. But Professor Party focused on constitutional issues, on how the electoral system is rigged in Canada and all the other cultural issues that can't be fixed. And that's why the way he handled this debate, should be the way we handle this thing going forward, because what I'm seeing from Danielle Smith, Pierre Poilievre, and Jason Kinney here is they're all focusing on economics. And as the Alberta independence movement drives forward and gets closer and closer and gains momentum, they're going to try to throw all kinds of oil pipelines and natural resources deals at Albertans and said, we fixed the problem, we fixed the economy. It's not about the economy. It's about the direction you want the future for your children, your grandchildren, and the country to go. And Canada is headed in a completely opposite direction, especially when it comes to the type of immigration they want.
And also to be able to maybe not explain it, but talk about it with people outside of Alberta or even outside of Canada. The cultural issues are also very important because, again, it's something that is being seen globally. And there's right now this war as to which ideology is going to win.
And I will talk a little bit before we play this of why Professor Party within Alberta got kind of a bad rap. They tried to smear his name because before this debate, he debated Jeff Rath, who's huge in the Alberta independence movement, about 8 or 9 months ago. And he brought up the fact about having specialty groups and specialty classes. And at that particular time, it wasn't as relevant as an issue as it is today. It's probably one of the most relevant issues, especially in BC, but globally right now. And Jeff Rath really hit him with, he's a traitor. He's trying to derail the Alberta independence movement by talking about specialty groups and classes, mainly because Jeff Rath has dual loyalties when it comes to First Nations and when it comes to Alberta independence. Now, I like him and I think he's a good spokesman for the party, but I didn't like how him and a lot of people that are in his space kind of smeared Professor Party here.
And again, and I will say it once over and over again, if there's anybody that is supporting Alberta independence and trying to give good talking points or to go to debates, even if they're from outside of Alberta, I think it is important to listen to their perspective as well, because it might add to all the points that you can do and give for Alberta independence too.
Well, yeah, and let us know how you feel about Professor Party, because I started watching a lot of him after this debate, and I was really impressed with a lot of his first principles, how he suggests what power a government should actually have. It should be extremely limited, and this is how you cut out lobbyists and a lot of corruption with the government. He had solid first principles, and he studied this for years. So this is somebody I think Alberta should be looking to.
And I kind of knew a little bit about him, and you, Guy, tend a little bit more towards libertarianism. I am a staunch conservative and super ultra hard right wing or whatever they want to label me. So I do disagree with him on certain issues. But overall, in this debate, he did obviously win.
Resolution here. Do you agree that the province of Alberta should cease to be a part of Canada to become an independent state? Professor Bruce Party, you were arguing in favor of the motion. You have the floor for your 4-minute opening statement.
Okay. Thank you, Harrison. I'm an Ontario boy. I was born there. I grew up there. I live there. I work there.
And pause it. Yeah, and he prefaced his opening statement with this because this is a big criticism of his, because he has supported Alberta independence very staunchly. And the big criticism of him is he's from Ontario, and I don't think he's not a nationalist in any way, shape, or form. So just because he's from Ontario, I don't think is a real criticism.
I don't want to see Canada destroyed. But here's the problem. It has already been destroyed. Canada has become impoverished, dysfunctional, corrupted, and autocratic. Canada is broken, and it cannot be fixed. Powerful people in this country will not allow it. Alberta, to save itself and possibly save the country, Alberta must leave. And a lot of Albertans want out. Now, I don't pretend to speak on behalf of Albertans generally, but this group of Albertans I agree with. So I'm going to use the word we. We, because I agree with them. Now, maybe Canada was once a free and noble country. I'm not sure anymore. But it certainly is not one now. It's politically corrupt. Its institutions have been captured. It has become a leftist, woke, progressive, socialist country.
And again, I've seen a lot of big debates about Alberta independence. This is probably the most powerful opening statement because he didn't focus primarily on economics. The economics debate is easy to win, but it's also easy for the National Party to win by throwing a bunch of goodies at the end. If you focus on these issues, you're going to create a fortified movement that can't be broken by national talking points and nationalists with the mainstream media.
Per capita, Canada is poorer than Alabama. It is almost as poor as Mississippi, the poorest state in America. And it has done that to itself. Canada's elites collaborate with foreign powers and global institutions. They sacrifice the interests of its people to plunder what remains of its prosperity. For a privileged class of public servants and private cartels, Canada has become a grift. The people are regulated, supervised, controlled, influenced, tracked, and surveilled, told what kinds of cars they must drive, how to carry their groceries, what medications they must take, how to speak, what to think, who to hire, taxed at work, at the store, at the pump, and in their homes. Canada is a managed society. Governments run the place. They have the people under their thumb. We don't want to live in this kind of country. We don't want to live in a progressive country. We don't want to share a country with Canadians who think all of this is okay. We reject their values. We reject their core beliefs. We want, above all else, to live in a country that is free. It's like being in an abusive marriage. We have irreconcilable differences. We do not love Canada anymore. We want a divorce. Over to you, Jason.
Okay, and you can leave it there. And I thought that was a powerful opening statement. And a lot of people have criticized that debate, and they have openly admitted they haven't watched it. I highly suggest, even if you disagree with Professor Party, that you watch that debate, because the talking points in there are really a masterclass on what you're going to need for this thing to succeed at a national level when the pushback comes, when the goodie bags come from the nationalists about pipelines, about natural resource contracts. They're trying to frame this as it's only economics. As you've seen there, he didn't need to frame it as economics, and all those talking points he made is going to be impossible for the nationalists to counteract. When it comes to economics, that's a completely separate debate, but he did address those issues and he won them fairly handily and fairly quickly, but again, focused on the cultural issues which they can't fix. Canada's headed off the cliff to the left, and Albertans are firmly standing where they always have, on the right.
And the main issue is that Canadians in general have for the longest time been a very proud people, even if they don't want to admit it. And now they have this cognitive dissonance where they still have to be proud of their country, of their free healthcare system, of their great economy, of their great real estate market, when none of that is true anymore because it imploded upon itself by the decisions that both, yes, the politicians and federal government, but the people themselves, by voting and by demanding and continuing to demand to be babysat by their government, that's where it led them to. And that's apparently where they want to continue to go. So you do have to hit upon the cultural issues and the fact that mentally, most Canadians that continue to think that Canada is this great place will not change it. So it can never really change, aside from the fact that the federal government is completely not equal for each province, for example, with Alberta. So even if, for example, a conservative came in, there wouldn't be much he could do or she could do to change, I hope not she, to change the way that Canada functions and the disaster that has been left for them.
Well, when you make the talking points he made in that opening statement, they're critically important on a national stage with national media, whether that's independent media or mainstream, because the talking points he made will wake up the rest of Canada, or a large portion, the west of Canada, which would be BC, Saskatchewan, and maybe even Manitoba. Those talking points everybody can relate to, and they know the direction Canada is going. When you focus on just economics, that can convince Albertans to vote, and it's an important thing to talk about within Alberta. But on a national stage, I really am for waking up a lot of these other provinces if they can be woken up.
You have to break that cognitive dissonance and shake people.
Yeah.
Because especially as an immigrant, and I hate saying that, when I would tell
Do you agree
Canadians,
that the province of Alberta-
playing again, when I would tell Canadians that their healthcare system was horrible and terrible, they had a really hard time even listening to that or hearing me say that as someone from the outside, because they always think that because they have free healthcare in the U.S., for example, has such a bad system, according to them, that they can always win on that point. And when someone tries to contradict them and shows them examples of how bad it is, it's hard, but eventually they understand that, oh, it's actually better in other places. Maybe it's even better in the place I criticize 24/7.
Yeah, when I first found out who Professor Party was, I started researching his name within the Alberta Independents, and there was so much backlash on him. There was a hit job trying to be done on him by a lot of people that have dual loyalties between Alberta Independents and First Nations. And I was really hesitant to kind of feature him and talk about him because there was literally so much backlash. But the more I listened to him, I must admit, I agreed with a lot of things, not everything. His idea of reconciliation is everybody has to have equal rights and no specialty groups, same as mine. But rather than bringing Albertans' individual rights up to First Nations so we're all equal, he just says take First Nations rights away so we're all equal.
And that's never going to win.
It's not going to win in a debate sense and in a long-term sense. And I would love to talk to him kind of about that. Why can't we bring Albertans' rights up to the level of First Nations, and then we have an equal nation and equal groups? And
I also think that that is one of the reasons why he is so, there's dual loyalties, etc., because I see the point that a lot of people are making, that by trying to take rights away from First Nations, or by even discussing the issue before we get to it, it might make a lot of Albertans or a lot of First Nations people say, well, but then what's actually going to happen? We don't want to do this, etc. So it becomes another sticking point to get somebody to sign the petition. But it is an important issue that has to be discussed, especially now that British Columbia has done the insanity that it's done.
Yeah, 8 months ago, I would have actually maybe agreed more with Jeff Rath saying the importance of Alberta independence above all else, but that just gets you over the finish line, and then you're going to have corruption at the beginning of the founding of the nation. What's going on in BC and largely internationally, and what he is bringing up is dividing nations all around the world now, specialty groups and specialty classes. It needs to be addressed, and that there needs to be an honest conversation had with First Nations at the beginning and the founding of the nation.
And not just the chiefs, all of them.
Yeah, right now there's a lot of big promises being made behind the scenes to these chiefs, what it's going to mean for Alberta independence. And on the other side, the nationalists are making huge promises and bribes behind the scene, and First Nations are being used to try to derail Alberta independence. I mean, just take the example of what's happening in BC. It's all based around specialty groups and classes. I think we hit that enough.
Well, I was just going to say, Party made the analogy of a marriage and that they want a divorce, but before you enter a marriage, or before you get married, you have to have those tough conversations. Otherwise, you don't know who you're marrying and what you're getting into. And having the financial conversations, the cultural conversations, how we're going to raise our kids conversations is something that has to happen within the Alberta independence movement before you start to build a nation.
I don't think you have to have all those conversations because it will derail at that point. You just need the most important one of the critical things of the founding of Alberta will be specialty groups and classes. And because when you go into negotiations, if the vote is approved and you vote for independence, you're going to go into this state of limbo where you negotiate with the federal government with an intern Alberta government before you have a constitution. And a lot of things can be smuggled in through that intern government when you have the negotiations with Canada that you're going to be forced to put in your constitution. That's why this one particular issue is very important to be had now. And I don't think it's as divisive as it was a year ago because of what's happening
because
in
of
BC.
the examples,
and because of what First Nations is trying to do right now, or the
federal government through First Nations.
At least the elite in the First Nations are trying to do to derail the Alberta independence movement with the NDP. Okay, let's move on. If we do have any comments, we'll take them.
Yes, Sean asks, Ron, are you here? Sometimes Ron comes by and visits. Unfortunately, our schedules are always basically conflicting because we stream at the same time, but thank you for coming. And eventually we would love to either have you on or go on.
Yeah.
But it's great to see you on WDW Pro usually. Lyle says, Kenny looked like a fool. Kenny is a fool.
Yeah, Kenny was a huge fool. And I actually seen a lot of people saying Kenny won the argument and they admitted they didn't watch the debate because there's so much hatred for Professor Party, and it's absolutely ridiculous. If you watch that debate, that was a masterclass from the
Party.
professor. Yeah, I was like, I was actually shocked, and it made me rethink how I talk about and how I debate Alberta independence. Economically, that's the most important issue within Alberta, but on a national stage, everything he brought up is probably far more important.
And it also helps break that cognitive dissonance a lot of Canadians have.
For the rest of the nation.
Yeah.
And once that cognitive dissonance is broken for the rest of the nation, you bring a lot more support to your movement.
Exactly. And Lyle says, Mr. Party is a great guy. He kicked Kenny. Mr. Party is very intellectual. And that's the thing. And Kenny was prepared for a different debate than the one that Party brought, which made him look even dumber.
But it was very obvious. But I will give Kenny this. He was well prepared and well researched for the debate he thought was going to happen. But when the debate actually took place, man, he was so unprepared because he only prepared for one issue, and every single nationalist can only really prepare for one issue because all those other issues are losing issues.
For the nationalists.
For the nationalists,
because Canada is lost, has been tanked completely. I will read Salam on, what is it called? Or UMBLE, sorry. Salam says, you remind us of the importance of community.
Yeah, most definitely. And hopefully when Alberta is founded as a nation, it's going to be much smaller than Canada. And we can rebuild this idea of community even within big cities. And you really need to start questioning what kind of immigration do you want? Do you want nations that are very culturally similar to you, or even if you get immigration from places that are culturally similar, you have an identity that they can adopt when they come to your nation.
And also the relationship between citizens and their government, and having a government that works for its citizens, by its citizens, not what we have now in many countries, not just Canada.
Well, and Alberta has the best birth rate within Canada, but it is still below replacement. So really focusing on how do you get your birth rate up? Hungary did a great
incentives.
Yeah, great incentives, and showed the world kind of how it's done. They put tax incentives. If you have 2 or more kids, a woman never pays taxes for the rest of her life.
But also creating the necessary conditions for young families to even be able to think about having children, like house, like job, like maybe mother can stay at home for longer than 3 weeks so they can be during the most important developmental stages of the child, which is 1 to 4 years old. All of these things can be done, especially in an economy like Alberta will have eventually once they separate, and with all the wealth that can be created there. Those opportunities can be had and the birth rate can be fixed. However, you have to not be within Canada.
Yeah, as long as we can avoid governmental corruption and bloat over time in Alberta, you're really set up to be one of the first nations to address the birth rates that are happening in Western society, specifically the U.S. and the rest of Canada.
Speaking of governmental bloat, from Gage Hobridge says, in Saskatchewan, more than 28% of people work for some level of government. In Manitoba, it's 26%. In British Columbia, it's 21%. And in Alberta, it's 18%. That's unaffordable. You can't grow an economy off of the backs of legions of bureaucrats.
Well, and I will say 18 is the least of all of them, but I would like to see that cut down to less than 5.
It's essentially almost like a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme where they work for each other. And it's unmanageable and unsustainable because how do you end up paying for all those bureaucrats when they also have not much to do?
They do have a lot to do, and that's the problem. They're expanding the scope of what government does and creating a managerial class and things that government should have no business in. They're over-regulating society, so then they need managers for that. You're creating a massive human resources department, and you're wondering why Karens are taking over Canada.
and the feminization of society as well. But
Even Professor Party was talking about government should have three main purposes, and it should be very small, and it shouldn't be able to actually have a lot of the control mechanisms it currently does over its citizens.
that's conservatism for everybody that has
Smaller
forgotten,
government.
especially in the Conservative Party and many conservative parties across the world. But it's not just the Canada problem either. The whole bureaucrat managerial class that exists now, where most people just work for the government, it's happening in the UK, it's happening in Australia, it's happening, unsurprisingly, I will say, in a lot of these Commonwealth nations.
Well, even in the U.S., all that bloat and regulation and the size of government has gotten out of control. Donald Trump is the first president to really dramatically cut it down. But even with him cutting it down, it's hard to get hundreds of years of bloat and regulation out of the system. Alberta literally found its own nation from scratch. You can have mechanisms built in so it's self-deregulating government, and so government can't expand its powers. And this avoids lobbyists, and this will also make corruption massively unincentivized with inside of government.
We're done with that section.
Oh, okay.
Because now we're doing it as we used to do in sections. I found the button, so we're moving on to Latin America.
Latin America really has two main stories, and this was supposed to actually be the cover story before we get into Canada. A lot of the Canadian stories, again, are related to Alberta.
And of course, the main issue right now is Cuba. From Money Ape, quote, Cuba is ready for big changes. Trump says Cuba survived for years on Venezuelan oil and money. Now that support is gone and they're getting a lot of support from Mexico as well, then that's being cut off as well. They're going to make a deal, he says, or we'll do it anyway. Cuba's economy is now under massive pressure without Venezuela. Cuba may join Iran against the... I don't think so.
A lot of people don't know what's going on in Central South America right now or with Cuba. And there's a huge cover for the United States to conduct military operations with cooperation with local governments. And that's kind of what's going on. They're cornering Cuba and they're going to make a deal without having to fire a shot. I really do believe that probably within the next 6 months, if not the next 3 months.
Yeah, I'd say even shorter, because a lot of the other dictatorships, I will call them, around Latin America were helping to sustain Cuba and sustain the dictatorship within Cuba. One of those big ones was Mexico, and the U.S., through like closed door conversations, got Mexico to stop sending the aid. They continued to do so, and then the thing in Puerto Vallarta happened.
Well, and then we're going to show some clips on the ground. There's literally riots going on, huge protests going on. There's a change coming in Cuba, and Marco Rubio has close ties to Cuba. This was always his goal. So the target is definitely on them right now.
Cuba, you said that Cuba wants to make a deal.
Yes.
What would the United States get in return for that? And why should Americans trust Marco Rubio to negotiate it?
Well, Marco Rubio is doing a great job. I think he's going to go down as the greatest Secretary of State in history. Look at what we've done as a presidency. Look at what we've done as an administration. They trust Marco, and so do the American people trust. He's been successful no matter where he's been. He also speaks the language, which is always nice and always helpful. But he's dealing, and it may be a friendly takeover. It may not be a friendly takeover. It wouldn't matter because they're down to, as they say, fumes. They have no energy. They have no money. They're in deep trouble on a humanitarian basis. And we don't want to see that, but they were very, very bad to a lot of people, as you know, and a lot of people living the Cuban-American vote, which I got at record levels. Very important. Those people are very important to me. I know what they went through. They went through hell. Some of them have gone on to be some of the most successful people in the country. Cuban-American business people, some of them are like the most successful in the country. And a lot of them are friends of mine because I've been fighting this battle with them for a long time. The Castro regime was brutal, but they lived off Venezuela. Now they don't live off Venezuela. Sends them no energy, no fuel, no oil, no money, no nothing. They lived without Venezuela. They couldn't have made it. And we cut them off from everything else. So, they're going to make either a deal or we'll do it just as easy anyway. Yeah.
Okay, and let's, no.
I know.
Keep it there.
Cuba, you said...
Hold on. I was trying to get done.
And yeah, let's watch the clips of what's actually going on the ground right now. Yeah,
and
if
they're
you-
saying down with communism.
I thought they were saying Viva Trump at the end. How did you get down with communism?
Because they said abajo el comunismo.
Oh, at the
They're saying liberty.
okay. Let's go to the other clip that we have as well. You speak Spanish.
Yes,
You
I
have
speak
your own
Spanish.
Spanish
I'm
club,
from.
so you know better than I do. And you can kind of read it there. And there's a lot of fires in the streets like this that are small at nighttime that's kind of happening where people are
Because
kind
there's
of
no energy.
yeah, because people are coming out of their house, even though that didn't look like a massive protest. The second one, the first one was in the daytime, but there is a lot of those smaller protests going on. I just wanted to get one clip kind of as an example there.
But also, the way Cuba has functioned for the longest time and the power players that were sustaining the dictatorship but also benefiting from it are also now being stripped from a lot of their powers and a lot of their influence within Latin America. That would be essentially the Foro de Sao Paulo countries. So Brazil, Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, essentially all the dictatorships. And a lot of them have been there's been a stop put to them by Trump and the U.S. in several different ways, either by sanctioning or saying don't do this, or by full on what happened in Venezuela.
Well, Trump did put out his doctrine that regards the Western Hemisphere. Canada's in the Western Hemisphere. It's one of the few countries that's not cooperating. It will turn into Cuba if Mark Carney keeps driving it in the same direction, which is basically into communist China's arms. That being said, oh God, I lost my
But
train of
also
thought.
oil-wise, again, I was going to go into the whole oil and the power play that's happening. Iran, Cuba, etc. They're all connected with what's happening with the oil as well. And this is why for Alberta, it's important to know what's going on globally, because it just gets better and better for them as time goes on. And if the U.S. manages to implement the plan within the Western Hemisphere that they're attempting to do.
Yeah, if you can secure a real oil economy, a real economy, and get rid of a lot of these cartels and organized crime gangs in Central and South America. And with the Shield of the Americas, where he met with a lot of leaders from El Salvador and these countries that are cooperating, they're working hand in hand with the U.S. and they're really trying to clean it up. America understands its sphere of influence is now the Western Hemisphere. I think Iran has a lot to do with kind of securing the Western Hemisphere as well, as long as they get out quick enough. I don't necessarily agree with the long-term war in any way, shape, or form. I was even kind of against a few weeks. That being said, if it does come to an end, it does have a very strategic a big strategic advantage for the U.S. within the Western Hemisphere. And there will be a bigger pie for everybody that cooperates within the Western Hemisphere. You can see that with what's happening in Mexico right now. They're renegotiating the North America Free Trade Agreement. And
without Canada.
And even though they don't have the new agreement placed, the United States, for every dollar they claw back from China with their trade war, they're investing $1 in $4, which is 25% into Mexican manufacturing. And American investment in Mexican manufacturing is far different than Chinese manufacturing investment. Chinese manufacturing investment involves 90% of the product being assembled in China, it being shipped over to Mexico. 10% is finished off in Mexico, and then they ship it to the United States for finishing. American manufacturing is start to finish manufacturing for all the high tech or all the low tech things they don't want to manufacture in the United States.
Within their Western sphere of influence.
Yeah.
Because I think they learned from the past few years of having essentially all of your production be outside of where you can reach it and or control it easily.
Mexico is going to become the new China when it comes to manufacturing as far as the United States is concerned. And the fact that Mark Carney won't cooperate. And when I'm watching a lot of liberal talk shows like The Line or other things, they're constantly talking about, well, what did we get for this? What did we get for that? How did this little trade work? And how the liberal mind thinks is just how Mark Carney thinks. It's tit for tat. We need to win every little engagement. Mexico the United States has enough leverage over Mexico where it just makes concessions. Trump likes that. And across the board, he's getting cooperation from Mexico. And in return, there's massive benefits from Mexico. And a typical trade deal, the way Mark Carney is trying to negotiate with Trump, maybe that would work. It's worked for Canada for the last 2 decades. It's not going to work with Trump and with this new doctrine of the Western Hemisphere.
And I think what Canada has to learn, and maybe these liberals have to learn, is when they ask, well, what do we get for this? What do we get for that? Why would we trade this for that? They're not in Canada is no longer, and it's put itself in no longer a position to do those kinds of negotiations. It doesn't have the power it used to have.
Well, if it invested in its natural resources and other things like
won't.
that, and it was a natural resource powerhouse to the times by 10 of where it is now, because that's where it should be. It needs to make up for lost time. If it was there, it would have negotiating power. But it doesn't have that power right now. But even without power, Trump is treating these countries that do cooperate fantastically. There's massive add-on benefits for Mexico. But when she originally started negotiating, I was saying, well, she's just capitulating here. But when I see it in the add-on benefits that were happening after, Trump is really treating people that treat him well as a mutual benefit.
However, if you want to see the dystopic utopia that a lot of these...
Before we get into Canada, we have one more story.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah, I'm just letting people know that Canada's coming up.
Okay. But if you want
You
to
don't need to yell at me.
speaking of Canada, if you want to see the dystopic utopia that they want to get into and that they're heading towards and that socialism and communism eventually brings you to, we can just look at Cuba and the situation that they're in right now, especially now that they've lost a lot of those allies and a lot of those other mini powers that were holding them up through their oil and etc., like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Brazil, Mexico. So I mean, therefore I am says a man who recently visited Cuba shows how citizens use ration booklets to buy a loaf of bread, noting that if they're lucky, they might occasionally be able to purchase an egg or two.
I am in Havana, Cuba right now, and this is where you bring your rationing notebook to get 1 piece of bread per day. This is the notebook right over here. You throw it over here, and then they'll give you 1 piece of bread. So you get 1 piece of bread, and then sometimes if they have extra, they'll give you 1 egg. Sometimes you'll only get a few eggs per month, not cartons, single eggs. And then if you're lucky, they might give you extras, but don't depend on it. I am in Havana, Cuba right now.
That's the direction Canada is headed right now.
That's where everything free, government pays for everything gets you, because eventually the government runs out of money.
Yeah, well, and the government is creating this cage in the system where they want the Canadian people to be absolutely 100% reliant on them. And they're trying to consolidate power within that system.
Because that gives further control to whoever runs the government. If everybody and your whole citizenry is dependent upon you and not building a society based upon merit and based upon what they can achieve through their own liberties and freedoms, then you get way more power and control over them.
If Alberta doesn't want that to be their future, it's time for independence. Yeah. And the whole, I think the entire Latin American section talking about Cuba is just an indication of where Canada might end up. Now, if Cuba does negotiate a deal with the United States, they may end up where Canada used to be 10 or 15 years ago when they were on par with the United States. Okay, let's go into Canada.
I'll read some comments just about this. Sean says, it's the safe society and it expands and expands where managerial elite have taken control but are unaware their perfect society is a dystopia. Exactly, and that's what happened to Cuba. They thought that by being able to manage everything and give everything away for free to everybody and have this perfect society, eventually those that end up not benefited by this or being taken advantage of by this system, be it the richer people, the ones that pay the most taxes, leave, which is what's happening in Canada and in the UK, where those that are taxed the highest, and people continue to say tax the rich, to support these kinds of programs that eventually turn into notebooks to get a little loaf of bread, they leave, and then you end up with no money and taxing those that you promised you weren't going to tax.
But it's absolutely shocking that something like this, they're actually trying to implement in Canada. I mean, Canada has so much natural resources. You have to be so ignorant and mismanage the country so badly not to be on par with the United States. Canada literally has, if not the second most resources after Russia. Russia has the most sanctions of any country in the world. Yet they're able to still function. I recently watched a new $3 billion rail line they installed in Moscow. It's the most impressive in the world right now. Every single station's a one-off with its lighting, its decorations. I was very impressed. Yet Canada has virtually no sanctions on it and it can't function. And definitely looks intentional at this point. And this is why Alberta needs to get out while it still can. And this is going to be the last opportunity for Alberta to do so.
It's the managed decline. Dill Biver, I think, says, I've seen a lot of pictures of garbage all over the streets. Well, yeah, when you don't have enough people to be able to run your society. Again, if you've never seen documentaries or people going to Cuba and interviewing people and seeing how life just got stalled in the 60s and 70s, even the cars and the buildings and etc., then I recommend you do so, because even if it seems very far away for a lot of countries that have veered towards that system and those ideals, it's not as far away as you think.
Yeah. I really do hope a deal is kind of reached with the United States and Cuba, because I think everything will turn around absolutely overnight. There'll be a huge amount of investment going into Cuba. Cuba is less than 90 miles, I believe, less than 90 miles off the coast of Key West, which is the United States.
And Daryl Robinson, hello, says, control the food, control the people, and at the end of the day, who has the guns hold the power. Exactly. And that's why they're doing the gun grab in Canada, too.
Well, yeah, they
disarm your population, control them, and give them everything for free until you run out. But by that point, you have them so controlled and so disarmed that they can't rise up.
Well, and the food costs in Canada
it's also insane.
It's obviously intentional at this point. I give a solution that would change food prices overnight, and that's take the tariff off U.S. food. Let U.S. food come into the market. Instantly, you have cheap food. Then what happens? That automatically dismantles all the dairy cartels and all the other food cartels within Canada. And then the federal government's going to have to take a real look at farming in Canada and deregulate it so it can compete with the American market and then rebuild its own food industry. So the temporary solution is take tariffs off the United States when it comes to food. These tariffs you've had on for decades, and it's the highest tariffs that they tariff the United States on is always food, and it's because they wanted to create these food monopolies. But this is obviously intentional by the federal government. You can control the food, you control the people, like he just said.
But it's also by, like, the whole we hate the United States has been this Canadian cultural position that they've had, I'd say, almost imposed and propagandized upon them for the longest time, to reject the US and see themselves as better. And now that they're not, they can't open their eyes enough to realize that that would be the easiest solution and the best solution, but they can't, because they can't cognitively dissonate from saying we hate the United States.
Well, I think that
very similar things are happening in Mexico. That's why
I think it's different now in Canada. Because I think there was a decline in Canada ideologically, but now they're at the point where that decline has kind of happened, and now they're going to make the hard shift towards China, towards socialism, and eventually communism. You can see they're moving away from the United States, away from freedom of speech, going towards compelled speech. They're going towards online censorship. They're going towards the Chinese model in British Columbia with property rights, where you can lease a house for 99 years, but you can't own it. It's absolutely insane. It's going to be the hard move towards China. I think Carney has chose to unite with China rather than the United States. And I think Mexico has made the hard decision to unite with the United States instead of China. We're going to see who the winner and loser is, but everybody's picking sides right now. I would much rather go with the United States.
A maybe new version of capitalism that Trump and the US are trying to implement via tariffs, and hopefully maybe eventually taking away taxes from people, which that seems like a dream. It probably is, but at least the idea is there. Or communism and dictatorships.
Well, I will say
in Latin America, we already went through the communist and dictatorships thing, so I think most people understand. But we talked about this, 3 years ago, about the multipolar world and how the world was reshifting and the powers were realigning. And now we're seeing who's picking sides.
Well, I'll say the big dig on the United States and their big fault is every 4 to 8 years, they can be very bipolar ideologically, especially in recent times with the left no longer being traditional liberal. They're now extremely woke and they want to go in the same direction Canada's going. I think the Democrats wanted to align with China and they were trying to sell the silverware before the ship sank. Trump's only been in office 1 year, and the United States is, for the first time in decades, growing faster than China. America's GDP is outpacing China for the first time.
But they don't want anybody to know that.
Yeah.
Sean says, Nat, you're absolutely right. Thank you. Says, it's like no one read Atlas Shrugged. We know how this ends. Exactly. And in Latin America, we've seen it. We've lived through it. A lot of countries have lived through it. And they're trying to implement it in certain countries as well. Here in Mexico, that's also what they're trying to do. And openly. I mean, they celebrated Chavez's funeral date the other day, and they continue to celebrate Cuba as well, the current government. Hopefully there's some smarter people coming in soon.
Well, I put a Venezuelan story in the U.S. section, I believe. Maybe I should have put it in the Latin American section, but it's very interesting what's going on with Maduro. They're looking to cut a deal with him, and he's going to probably blow the whistle on both politicians on the left and the right that were taking massive bribes from Venezuela for years. So we might have not got the Epstein documents, and I will say that's the biggest Achilles heel of the Trump administration. Now that he says he's released it all, we can't believe it. It's the boy that cried wolf at this point. But if he does get Maduro to flip for a deal, that would be absolutely huge if we get names and then get prosecutions on those names.
James, I'll just say James, says, bold prediction, the Republic of Alberta will be the top place to live in the world. It could even try to become the new Dubai almost.
I would say so as well, especially because the United States can be bipolar every 4 or 8 years. I think Alberta will have a consistent ideology and a consistent identity, but it really needs to make sure it builds that and it doesn't get derailed or put off track by bad immigration policies, because that's how your culture erodes. You already have the economy and the jobs to kind of be picky on who you're letting into the country. And hopefully they let us in one day.
Yeah. And I said Dubai, probably better related to Monaco because Dubai is a gross place. So I didn't want to compare them to Dubai, but I'll say Monaco.
I don't mind Dubai. I know you have a hatred on Dubai.
Monaco's better. Sean says, James, exactly. I want to move to Alberta if it's independent. Get me out of Oregon. Yeah, get yourself out of Oregon.
The amount of people that I know,
right there.
When we were going to leave Canada for Mexico, we left for Mexico because you're originally from Mexico and you have connections down here. Yeah. So it was much easier to relocate down here. We definitely took a look at Alberta, but we didn't, number one, know anybody there. But number two, when I talked to all of my friends, everybody was thinking about leaving Canada. A lot of them did at this point, but every single one considered Alberta before they left the country. Some actually moved to Alberta. A lot of my friends that were truck drivers moved to Alberta because it was an easy relocation for jobs.
And Sean says, without Alberta, where will Canada get their money to have their perfect society? Well, and without their billionaires, because a lot of them are leaving too.
Well, where they were going to go was British Columbia. I truly believe, because I've worked in the oil sector and mining sector within BC as well as Alberta, I believe BC is at least not as rich as Alberta, maybe even more rich, but it's completely their natural resource sector they haven't really dived into because there's so many regulations on BC, and the ruling parties within BC are woke liberal parties or woke NDP parties that just refuse to go into natural resource development.
It's ideologically stalled, and it cannot move forward or progress forward using their own natural resources because legally, to remove a lot of the stopgaps that have been put to be able to exploit their natural resources will take forever to overturn as well.
If Alberta does separate, the federal government's going to be looking at BC, but they're trying to put stopgaps within BC right now by giving land rights, especially along the entire coast, to First Nations tribes. If they do that, it's going to be almost impossible to exploit BC's natural resources when they actually want to. Right now, they don't want to. But once Alberta leaves, BC is really the only other option that they could replace that income with.
So essentially, who knows? And I don't think they even know. And that's why they're so panicked. And I think that's why we're just seeing the ramp up of them trying to stop the Alberta independence movement. Just now, it's starting.
Yeah, but the fact that they're giving over, ceding land back to all these First Nations tribes is, and the reason they're doing that is so they don't see an independence movement emerge within BC. But the fact that they're doing that is going to hinder them once Alberta leaves to access their own natural resources. Because if they do access them, they're going to have to split all these contracts with all these First Nations groups. And it's not going to be profitable at that point. Yep. Because all those remittance payments they're going to give to the First Nations, Alberta is just giving directly to the federal government. There's not going to be that same piece of the pie for the federal government.
So where will they get their money? Either China, India, maybe. That's why they're making so many deals with them. And kind of an emerging economy, but also terribly mismanaged. Or they'll just turn into Cuba faster than they think.
No, I think there's a third option. I think the third option is the correct one, which they'll just start to balkanize. So next you'll see Quebeco, which I don't think can actually stand on its own 2 feet, not because they don't have natural resources, but because ideologically they're unwilling to access their own natural resources. They have natural gas. They have oil in Quebec as well. They're unwilling to actually access it. They prefer to buy it from overseas and from within Canada. They buy oil from Alberta, but they don't want to allow Alberta to build a pipeline. And I know I had a lot of pushback when I said Quebec bought oil from Alberta. It's a big secret, but they do. I researched it after I got pushback.
And Sean says, see you guys, gotta run. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for being here.
And if you haven't liked and subscribed, please do so. It helps get the channel out a little bit more.
And Mostly Stunned says, my bags are packed. If Alberta doesn't bail, at least 4 of my 6 trades tickets easily convert to U.S. international standards. That's good. I'll go elsewhere and live for way less. Maybe actually keep my earnings. Weird concept that you might be able to keep whatever you earn.
Well, and it's absolutely fantastic.
And being in trades is also good because, yes, they're transferable to places like the U.S., but also they're very needed in many, many countries around the world.
Well, it's absolutely fantastic because Canada does have some of the highest standards when it comes to trades, whether it's plumbing or electrical or any other trade for that matter. So usually you can transfer a lot of those tickets to the U.S. extremely easily. Also, the U.S. has a new immigration visa for blue-collar workers in Canada. They need blue-collar workers right now, and they prefer to have somebody that's culturally aligned. So if this Alberta independence thing gets derailed by Mark Carney, somehow, way, shape, or form, I think you're going to see a lot of blue-collar Albertans leave for the United States. And Trump welcome them.
And live better lives.
He's already preparing to welcome them with this visa.
And live better lives. But now let's actually get into the Canadian section, even though it's basically been it the whole time. Because, yes, Canada continues to be insane, starting with from Harrison Faulkner. Quote, Canada's Department of National Defense says it is withholding intelligence regarding small boats in the Caribbean from the United States Navy, protecting the terrible people.
This is massive news, and a lot of Canadians might not know because I watch a lot of Canadian content creators, mainstream and independent. Nobody's talked about this story, and nobody's talked about nobody's talked about the multiple strikes that happened last week in Central and South America. The Shield of the Americas is currently being assembled. There's a lot of cooperation going on between these Central and South America countries and the U.S. administration militarily, and especially intelligence-wise. The fact that Canada has turned their back on the United States when they're creating a major operation against drug cartels and organized crime, Trump's not going to forget it in any way, shape, or form. And Canada was wondering why the United States didn't tell them before they struck Iran.
Exactly.
Well, this is exactly why. They're trying to clean up the North America or the Western Hemisphere right now, and Canada is doing everything to hinder it.
And also because Canada signed an agreement also with China, or is about to sign an agreement with China to share intelligence with them.
Yeah.
So the enemy of their neighbor.
Not just to share intelligence with them, they've opened up the gates to CCP military members now joining the Canadian military directly on the northern border of the United States, where you've previously trained them in cold weather fighting conditions to fight India. You've trained them on U.S. planes. What do you think Donald Trump is going to think at this point?
But also, it's not like there's no cartel activity within Canada, in the port of Vancouver, and also in the east. They're already there. They've been there for years now. For the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, other Cartel de Sinaloa, they're already there, and they're using the ports to bring in precursors from China.
It's one of the largest unprotected borders in the world, even though security has been amplified. I used to work along the borders, different places along the Canadian borders in natural resources and other things, and most of it is completely unprotected. The southern border of the United States is completely militarized right now, so they're just setting up shop in Canada, and Canada has created an infrastructure for them to do so, and do so very easily.
But it's still insane. From Brian Gertison, says, quote, this is unaliving, I will say. Empathy, I guess the people of Montreal will just have to learn the hard way if this happens. And it says, should Montreal become a sanctuary city?
Well, and you should be forewarned. Just like you should be looking at what's happening in BC about private property rights. Look what happened with sanctuary cities in the United States. It's absolutely devastating those regions. You have a huge problem with they don't require voter ID in sanctuary states, so illegals can vote in those states, and that's why those states are, and that's how you rig elections.
This rally in front of Montreal City Hall is calling on the mayor to make the metropolis a sanctuary city. But what exactly does that mean?
A sanctuary city is when a municipality enacts some kind of policy, ordinance, or declaration intended to make the city safe for all residents. And that might include asylum seekers, people without status.
Back in 2017, under the court.
Like, honestly, when I hear that tone of voice and that kind of woman and person, it makes my skin crawl just because it reminds me of when I used to live there.
Well, when we used to cover geopolitics in depth, I tell you, almost all the really good, juicy stories came from sanctuary cities because they're crime-ridden, they're overtaxed, there's no voter ID you need. Everything happens in California, Chicago, New York, these sanctuary cities.
Their administration, the city of Montreal unanimously approved the motion declaring itself a sanctuary city. 1 year later, the Plante administration got rid of the title and established what's called the Access Without Fear policy. It was meant to give migrants with uncertain legal status access to various services free of charge and in a confidential manner without having to worry about being reported to authorities.
It is extremely difficult. We have housing crisis, we have the affordability crisis, and undocumented and precarious status migrants are on the forefront of that. Why? Because they're very often denied work permits.
They are there, except that they don't have any rights. They don't have any rights, so they are being exploited. So we want them to have dignity and freedom.
This expert believes Montreal is flirting with the idea of being a sanctuary city, but not fully committing.
So Montreal can do all kinds of really important things around being, a sanctuary city in spirit. If we think about being welcoming, accommodating,
be a sanctuary city with two spirits.
Yeah.
This is obviously a liberal point of view I don't agree with, and my counterpoint to this would be take a look at the sanctuary cities in the United States and how that turned out. And these are hubs for cartels as well.
But it's also ironic that they mention, we're in a housing crisis, we're in a jobs crisis, and not saying that the citizens should get priority first and something should be done about that first, is before you welcome in more people to continue to hinder the state of things.
But if it doesn't specifically restrict police from sharing information, then it's limited. It's taking on sanctuary in a particular frame.
The Canadian Border Services Agency says it does engage with police forces like the Montreal Police Department when they encounter people who have been previously deported and are subject to immigration warrants. Montreal police confirm they work with the CBSA in cases related to crime, but say they are not mandated to investigate people's immigration status or conduct immigration-related operations.
A lot of people are scared to do day-to-day activities because of the presence of police, the potential of being deported at any time.
In a statement, the city says besides its Access Without Fear policy, it also offers a financial program to organizations that support and assist migrants without status and with precarious status. Organizers say they wrote an open letter and they plan to give it to the mayor of Montreal.
And remember when we covered the article, I think it was on the last episode, about within these sanctuary cities, they want to pay for full child daycare, dental, everything else for these migrants when Canadian citizens are the one that pays for this.
And don't have access to it.
And they don't even have the same level of access. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I also want to know if an illegal migrant or refugee is not allowed to work in Canada, what the hell are you paying for their daycare for?
That too. But it's also insane that lady, one of those ladies, was saying, we don't want them to be afraid to go outside and be deported, or if they have non-legal status or status to be within. They should be afraid. That's the whole point of having borders. That's the whole point of having a CBSA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, they should be afraid because they're there illegally. God.
Okay, let's keep going here. I'm going to use the restroom real quick. If there are any questions, now's a good time.
I'll go to questions. Well, not questions. I'll go to comments. Joe Rush. Hello, Joe Rush. Thank you for being here. Says 1 million Canadians collecting unemployment, 917,000 on government assistance, 8 million on disability, about 7 million receiving pension, and 20 million Canadians collected pandemic relief. Exactly. And yet we want to continue to give our money away. Also, today I was seeing, for example, that they're increasing the cost of university, or I don't agree with going to university in most cases unless it's absolutely necessary, but they're increasing the cost of education for Canadians, but at the same time, they're giving away and making programs for Indian students, for example. So there's a clear lack of caring for their own citizenry, and there's now, in my opinion at least, a very clear intention to just fully stop caring about your citizens and replace them with cheaper, easier to manage others.
Well, not only that, they released documents by 2030. It's not birth weights. They're going to replace every person within Canada. It's immigration. And the reason they like that model, it goes hand in hand with MAID. They can just get rid of people that are too old or too sick. It saves them money. Or too
expensive for them.
Or too expensive. And they just bring in an immigrant in their prime and work them to the bone until it's time to either send them back or send them to the MAID program as well. It's a financial joke. How they don't care about the life of their actual citizens anymore.
It's a death cult. They don't care about life.
It's like this. It's almost like they're so worried about GDP. They want to figure out how to maximize GDP on the backs of their citizens.
Mm-hmm. And immigrants too.
Without actually considering what's the quality of life of their citizens.
Yeah. They're only concerned about themselves and their power. Daryl Robinson says sanctuary cities are so successful, like LA, Portland, Chicago, New York City. So go for it, boneheads.
Yeah, and I've lived in a lot of those sanctuary cities. I grew up half in Vancouver, Canada, and half in California. But I actually moved around the United States. A lot of the places I ended up with sanctuary cities, actually, and God, they're beautiful. If you could just take out the crime and all the other crap, they're much like Vancouver.
But managed decline.
It's like they literally took over Washington State, Oregon, California, the entire West Coast, which is some of the most beautiful land in the United States, and absolutely destroyed it to the bone.
Managed decline. But interestingly, some in BC might have seen the light, at least a little bit, a tiny crack of light, because from the Conservative Party of BC, and again, I don't fully, almost at all agree with the Conservatives in Canada. I think they're just masked liberals, but still. They say breaking BC Conservative surge ahead of the BC NDP because the BC NDP gave away property rights. This comes following the NDP's worst deficit in history, new taxes on seniors, and continued assault on private property rights.
Well, and I'm also going to say this. I actually wouldn't mind Pierre Poilievre as a national politician, although I will say he's not going to be able to change Canada in a substantial way. That's why Alberta independence, no matter who gets in, is important for it to go forward. But I will say this about conservatives within British Columbia. British Columbia in general is so woke in its densely packed areas like Vancouver and Victoria that the conservatives just pander to them and they give up a lot of their first principles. A lot of the principles that are on the national platform of conservatism, they kind of ignore and they want to pander because they're trying to compete against the NDP. The fact that the NDP just gave away private property rights in the biggest city in the province and they want to expand this and they're saying this is a good policy and they still have 39% is insane to me. I don't take this.
And the deficit that they're in. It's insane what they've done.
Well, I'm seeing all these Canadian content creators, a lot of them from British Columbia, bragging about this. And I'm like, are you out of your mind? 39% and they just gave away private property rights. They should be at zero, the NDP should be. The fact that they're not just shows that there's so much support within the province for that. And just because you're going to win BC as a Conservative Party, the rest of Canada, you have absolutely no hope for, and especially where all the political power is consolidated, and that is in Quebec and Ottawa. And that's one of the biggest reasons for Alberta to separate.
It's lemmings. And again, we lived in BC and we left for a reason. When we left, luckily, before the more insane things started coming, but it was already insane.
Yeah, and I hope that their poll numbers continue to drop to at least 15%. If the NDP gets to 15%, that's acceptable to me. Okay, there's 15% crazy people in the province after you give away private property. I don't think it's going to drop that much. I think it might go down to 35 or 30.
Mm-hmm. But speaking of treason, the actual treason, apparently Matt Genero finally stepped up to speak as a first-time Liberal member. He betrayed all of his constituents who voted for him as a Conservative. Then he said he was going to step away from politics and then ended up as a Liberal.
This is crazy what he's going to say here. And you can see he's now in the Liberal Party. The Liberals want to appeal towards men. They've lost all masculinity. They've lost all male voters. And so he's going to talk about what's bothering men, what's going against men. We need programs for men. Men don't want programs. Men don't want help. Men want you to fix the economy so they can have a good job, have a wife, and have a house. You
And a
fix
family.
those three things, you're the party men are going to vote for. But you're the party that's destroying those three
Again,
things right
it's
now.
the liberal mentality that apparently he always had.
Mental health crisis.
Oh, pause it.
75%
They're not fixing these things because they want to be the husband of all these women in Canada. They want you to come to husband
Dependence.
government rather than find an actual husband.
Dependence. Yeah.
mental health crisis. 75% of suicides in this country are men. 75% of drug overdoses in this country are men. Men's life expectancy is 4.5 years shorter. 65% of men delay seeking help. Can the Minister of Health confirm that this government is committed to ending the stigma around men's mental health?
The stigma around men's mental health is the country they're having to live in and the environment they're having to live
This
in.
is a liberal saying this, and you can see they're trying to go after a certain voter here, and that's men. And this is even immigrant men, because immigrant men are starting to see through this shit too.
Mental health crisis.
Yeah, and that was his first statement. It's obvious the direction they want to try to steer the party in.
And because there's this, I'll say almost kind of right belief, but not fully, where men are in the conservatives. So you're going to have to pander to the men, but they're doing it through a liberal lens. And I think maybe that was part of the strategy, aside from many other things of why they're having these conservative floor crossers to speak to the men, but they don't.
It's crazy. And like Pierre Poilievre should just come out and it goes, yeah, these are issues, but what actually you need to fix is not building programs to reduce suicide amongst men. You need to fix the economy, fix housing, and fix the culture. So we have families that are put as the center of a culture, not immigration.
Let men be men. Let them be productive. Let them build. Let them be free and actually be useful and productive to the society. It benefits, and for the longest time, for all of history, it's benefited societies. And for some reason, liberals and crazy people and communism, they decided that it wasn't useful anymore.
Well, because all their programs and all their funding is to promote feminism and women. So the thing is, they don't want to take away all those programs or all that funding.
But also to try to fix men through a female but feminist female lens.
Yeah.
It's not even a feminine lens, because that wouldn't, the programs don't help actual women. They're just turning them into little useless men. So the programs don't help anybody, but it's the expansion once again of the government.
They want to feminize men through counseling.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Oh, goody. I hate TikTok. From Mark Nixon, quote, Ottawa just approved TikTok's investment in Canada after a national security review. Not a very long one, I guess. The government says Canadians' data will be protected. New security guardrails are in place. A third-party monitor will audit access. Is that the third-party monitor from the CCP that every Chinese company is forced to have within their company? Who knows? Reminder, TikTok's parent company is ByteDance in China.
This is crazy. The Canadian government's trying to shut down and have lawsuits against American social media companies, primarily X, because it refuses to be controlled. It actually wants to maximize free speech as much as it can. But the Canadian government wants to go through a censorship model that is in alignment with them, so they can rig elections, indoctrinate the population and everything else. The American social media system won't let them do that, but the Chinese will. And this is just another example of Mark Carney turning towards China.
Well, this is essentially, they want the TikTok that China has, that is allowed to control what the population sees and what they access, and all the other apps that are also used allowed to be used within China are just measures to continue to control the population and to surveil the population too. I'm guessing it won't be called TikTok soon. It'll be Douyin, which is what it's called over there. The one that's managed by the CCP. It is all managed by the CCP. I have a bunch of videos I made in Spanish about this, so I really dove deep into what TikTok actually is, how it came up, and what it's actually used for, both in America and this hemisphere and in China. I mean, yes, I know we have TikTok somewhere there, but I don't love the idea of it.
Well, and there's two different TikToks. There's one for Chinese people and then one for Westerners. The Canadian government is going to get the typical Western one, which is meant to corrode society at a cultural level.
And control it.
Yeah.
Moving on from Keith Wilson says, quote, this will cause more people to move out of Canada and it'll be the job creators who leave. Mark Nixon says the Liberal home equity tax proposal would charge Canadians every year based on the value of their home. You don't need to sell.
You don't have to. We won't dig too much into the numbers. You can pause the video and go into the numbers if you want. But this is just the first phase they want to bring in. They've done all the research studies, everything they need to do before they actually bring in home equity tax, which is going to be broadened out to a very broad equity tax like Bitcoin and other assets. That being said, this is how you end up owning nothing and being happy. It's going to be impossible to pass your home down to your children once home equity tax, number one.
Or to sell it.
Number one comes in, but then is expanded.
So
they want to say it's only for homes that are over $1 million or $2 million, but eventually it's expanded to everything. And in Vancouver, even a small apartment costs $500,000 at this point.
Yeah, a tiny little one uses one. But what is insane is that this is also hindering all of those Canadians that were promised under the current, I guess, capitalist economic model that was now reliant upon debt almost fully. It's taking away essentially everything they ever worked for. And the promises that were made that if you bought a house and it gained interest and equity and et cetera, that would be your ticket out and that would be the way you'd be able to get more and more money. And the investment was worth having. Now they destroyed it completely.
I did a deep dive on this subject, actually. If you can bring it back up. Of course you did.
Sorry.
All the stories that I know best.
Do you want me to go back?
No. With the CPP in Canada, that's the pension plan. A lot of people rely on that, and what they want to do is bring in a home equity tax, so your CPP won't cover that home equity tax. And in their research study, what they said is you can defer the payments until you pass away, and then they'll just take it off from the price of the home, whatever's left. This means you won't be able to pass it down to your children. And if you defer the payments, there is an extremely high interest rate on there. And this is just another attack on private property. Between this and First Nations land rights and land claims for private property, it's not going to exist within Canada within 10 years.
And I mean, when they did this study and when they proposed this, the research group, retarded research group that did this, said that this would help generate more income to be able to build homes, etc., for the young people. However, this is also impeding the young people from accessing homes that are already existing because now nobody wants to leave because they can't. If they defer the payments, then they can just wait until they are no longer here with us and have that put on top of the cost of the house, which actually just increases the home value.
Well, I'm talking directly to Albertans here now, and that is you're about to found a nation when you get your independence. There should be no property tax on anybody. This incentivizes young people to buy homes, and once it gives a reward to older people once they finish paying off that home. The fact that governments around the world are actually able to tax property is absolutely ridiculous. This is like how a king used to tax a serf. Once you buy a property and you pay it off, it should be yours outright. Why are you constantly paying a tax, which is like paying rent for the rest of your life when you supposedly own it?
All of those taxes are sometimes justified as, it's for the school district, it's for the healthcare, it's for the this, it's for the that. All of those things, anywhere where you pay property tax for that, are broken anyways. They're not something used or managed properly anyways.
Well, most oil-rich countries don't have property tax, and they generally don't have taxes on citizens. So it would be very easy for Alberta to adopt that model. But when it comes to property tax specifically, conservatives know this. And that's why Ron DeSantis has put it on the next ballot to get rid of property tax within the state of Florida. And Donald Trump wants to adopt something on a much broader level. But now that there's been a hit against his tariffs, he's still going to be able to implement his tariffs, but he's going to have to do it in a different way. It's going to be much harder for him to get rid of property taxes. That was one of his big goals. But when a country like the United States starts getting rid of property taxes in certain states, or maybe even on a federal level, it really sends a message to the rest of the world. And citizens around the world start waking up and saying, why are we paying a tax? That's like paying rent.
And what are we getting from it?
Yeah, taxes is getting so high. It's more affordable just to rent at a certain point.
Again, that's why we are seeing that happening in a lot of Canadian cities. And this is insane too, from Mark Nixon. 16-year-olds can now inject, it's not illicit in Canada, but illicit substances during school lunch break.
Would it say Tylenol here?
Sure, Tylenol.
Okay. We can't say that word on YouTube because of censorship.
Non-illicit
But you can see it on the
substances, I
screen
would
right
say.
now.
Yeah. Approved by Mark Carney. Apparently, a 16-year-old can't buy alcohol or cigarettes, but under the Liberals, they can legally walk into a federally approved injection site and put bad stuff into their veins.
Tylenol in their
Tylenol into their veins. Insight is this is from Vancouver Coastal Health. This is another reason why we left.
And again, in Vancouver, when we were living there, they legalized all hard drugs and they legalized doing them in public on the street. So cops aren't allowed to say anything.
But also the wording here is very worrying, I would say. It says Insight is a supervised intravenous substance injection site designed to be accessible to people who use those things who are not well connected to healthcare services for adults aged 16 and older. So the fact that they're putting 16-year-olds under the adult category should be worrying enough because, as we've also talked about and when we volunteered with Billboard Chris, they're continuing to try and lower the age of consent and the age at which you are considered an adult. If anybody, and I worked in 2 different schools for about 5 years in Vancouver with teenagers, they were high schools. If anybody wants to tell me that a 16-year-old can be classified as an adult, they're insane and deluded.
Well, and they're trying to lower the age of voting to 16 as well. They're doing it in some regions of Canada in certain elections, but they want to do that across the board. And then they want to lower the age of safe injection sites. They want to get young people addicted to drugs so they're non-educated voters. And they vote for these crazy left-wing lunatic policies. And they're stripping parental rights. And this is only the beginning. If they can get it down to 16, next it's 14, and then it is you have complete bodily autonomy and everything else from the time of birth. Parents are going to have to ask their children before they put their shoes on.
The MAID program is also being expanded to teenagers, which is also insane. But I will say, if it's not clear to anybody yet that the whole safe injection site project that they had and the whole utopia they were trying to build didn't work, then you're also deluded.
Yeah,
so the people that still defend those programs, and I know some people still do, go to Vancouver and see how it's working out for them.
Well, they want to start bringing those programs across Canada as well. And this is why you're going in one cultural direction with Canada, and Alberta is a different direction. You should be opening rehab facilities if you want to invest money in this kind of stuff, not safe injection sites. So that money needs to be diverted from those safe injection sites.
And it's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's a lot that gets lost in the weeds as well, same as with housing.
Well, it's an entire ecosystem they've built within Vancouver, and it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, if you ever want to look into how insane it is and the connections between politicians and these programs that they built and sent millions of dollars to, look up Altria in Vancouver and what happened with that housing project that was basically just a money laundering scheme. Because I know that story pretty well, but it's really long. So
well, I know a lot about these, the housing schemes and the government housing for drug addicts and things like that.
Yeah,
because
that was one of them.
A lot of my friends that worked in security worked for those housings. The pay was actually very good. It's some of the highest paying you're going to get for security. That being said, it's extremely dangerous.
And it's extremely mismanaged and used to move money around. But speaking of mismanaged and moving money around in a way, from Ryan Gertison, quote, this is the Fraser Institute President Niels Veldhuis on BC's property crisis. He's exactly right. Who will want to ever invest in a country where at any moment they could have their private property taken away from them?
Yeah, and again, I put a couple stories in here about private property rights and specialty classes. This is the most pressing issue, not just within Canada, but globally. It is ripping countries apart right now. And it's doing it through UN law, which these countries are adopting, saying, well, we're just going to adopt the international standard. It's an excuse.
Drew, I think this is the number one issue in BC right now. I mean, we are walking our way into a crisis. The foundation of Western success, generally speaking, is private property, right? The fact that you own property, you know that it's yours, you can trade it, you can lease it, you can borrow against it, you can leverage and build up wealth. And when that's at risk, everything that we have in our society is at risk. And that's unfortunately what we're facing in BC. There's no way to sugarcoat it other than this is something that every single person in our province should be made aware of, should be thinking about. And I would also go beyond that and to say that it extends to all of Canada. So it's one of these issues that's going to create a lot of uncertainty, that is going to negatively impact our economy. And I think that's why the government is so worried about this Supreme Court decision. I personally think a little hypocritically because they have contributed to the uncertainty. They've contributed to the push for Aboriginal title in our province. And I can kind of walk you through what's happened over the course of the last several years.
And well, maybe we'll let it play and then I'll comment on it.
But there's no doubt that the Cowichan decision has put a massive blanket of uncertainty over our entire province. Sure.
The federal government,
More uncertainty.
The federal government hasn't just contributed to this issue. They've created this issue along with the UN by adopting these international standards. And then on top of that, the federal government has been the one in power for more than a decade now. Most of the judges on the Supreme Court, they're going to hear this decision, are ideological judges that are going to rule based on ideology. We showed on our last episode that judges are no longer following the law. In their rulings, they're literally giving excuses of why ideologically they're ruling the way they're ruling rather than legally ruling the way they're ruling. And that was the story about immigration and daycare.
Mm-hmm. And continuing down this line of Vancouver and property rights and the insanity of it, Daniel Foch did a great interview here. I would recommend you go see it all because it's interesting how worried this First Nations lawyer is about all of this. But it says Mark Nixon, quote, 2 million properties in Metro Vancouver sit within Musqueam traditional territory. Legal expert warns recent rulings and agreements could challenge the indefensible nature of BC land titles. And it's insane. I'd say go watch the whole interview.
First Nations, they can't give their interest in their land to anyone but whom? The government.
Okay.
So all this business of, well, the government will come in and negotiate. This is what we hear of the Cowichan. I said, no, there's nothing in the case law that says that. They either have title or they don't. And if they have title, it's their land. All this business of, well, you'll just pay your taxes to a different. You get rights of occupation. Well, that's not indefeasible title. The federal minister and Musqueam have both said, private property is not included. I want your listeners to hear me very carefully on this. That's not true. Okay? It's not true. The agreement, the map of the Musqueam territory includes Vancouver Harbor, Stanley Park, all like big hunk of West Vancouver. That's where I live. North Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, and there's a lot of private property involved there. There is no express exclusion in the agreement. Musqueam also said, well, it only includes federal lands. I want your listeners to hear me. That's not accurate. There is no delineation of federal or provincial lands. I mean, understand what the Cowichan court said, that when the suspension is up to 18 months, and if we don't get a stay, the Cowichan can go to court on their 800 acres. And for those people that weren't represented, that own property, the judge said the Cowichan can seek the normal remedies of possession of their land. Okay? So that's a reality today for those poor folks on the 800 acres. Now you go into court to defend your title. So what do? The first thing you do is you pick up your title. Do you know what else the Cowichan court did? Oh, they said, oh, by the way, anytime there's a finding of Aboriginal title anywhere in BC, not just on the 800 acres either, the Land Title Act doesn't apply. The judge didn't invalidate the title. So the judge says, oh, I'm not invalidating those titles. I'm just going to say that the Land Title Act doesn't apply to them. So now you go in to defend your title if you're on the 800 acres. You lift up your title, but there's nothing on it now because the court has said the Land Title Act doesn't apply, which is what grants you indefeasible title as against the world. So your next question will be, well, Tom, what do you have? The honest answer is I don't know. You have a piece of paper. You don't have the Land Title Act anymore, so you don't have indefeasible property as we know it at law. Unlike every other Western democracy on the planet, okay? You've got some sort of common law right to occupy that land, okay? And evidence that you once had indefeasible title up against a constitutional right to land held by a First Nation. So that's a reality today if Cowichan isn't overturned. Can't make that up. And I think that's an accurate description, what I just said.
And again, go watch the whole thing. It's here. It's Daniel Foch, and it's called Full Truth, Our Land Claims, Threat to Property Rights in British Columbia.
Well, and again, this is going on across the globe with federal governments, provincial governments, First Nations, and the UN, and it's the UN that's putting all this in. I truly believe the UN is trying to use this to strip private property rights, and also the UN was about to go bankrupt, so they're trying to find a way to make money. What I believe may happen next, and this is just a theory on my part, is they have all these First Nations groups and Aboriginal groups in Central America, South America, British Columbia, Australia. I mean, you name it, they have these groups. They're going to create a unified body within the UN that they will share natural resources on that land. So they give the UN a taxes, and the UN will create international law about extraction of natural resources on those lands. And I think that's how the UN begins its funding its global governance.
And again, Alberta, this is why you can try to avoid the issue. You can try to not face the First Nations issue outright and actually have the important conversations about it. But it is incredibly important when you are founding the nation that all of this is very clearly delineated and it is all taken care of before things like this can start to happen or be snuck in to the Constitution like here, because then it becomes a huge mess and nobody knows what's happening and you lose everything.
Well, especially when the First Nations elites are already trying to derail the Alberta independence movement. And again, my suggestion is different than Professor Party's suggestion. My suggestion is First Nations have this many rights. Albertans have this many rights. Rather than take away First Nations rights, is so we can have equal playing field, just bring up Albertans' rights to the level of First Nation rights, and now there are no specialty groups or classes in the letter of the law. That way you don't have these issues that are literally breaking apart nations as we speak.
Yeah. Get rid of the virtue signaling, get rid of the feelings, get rid of the emotions, and talk about it openly.
And again, it's not just it's not just property rights. They're creating division with these specialty groups. It's compelled speech, hate speech laws, all kinds of things are layered on top of specialty groups and specialty classes, and they're using international law through the UN to do this.
I will even go as far to say, get rid of the guilt that comes with talking about the issue or facing the issue forward. Because when does it end? That's the same question I said yesterday. When does this end? When does reconciliation end? And you have to put a time frame as to when it ends. Otherwise, it'll continue to take a hold and control of the country and the new country of Alberta.
And I hope I have it. There's somebody from Alberta that made a clip on how you address private property rights if you live in Alberta. We'll keep going. We'll see if it pops up.
Okay.
Well, it's not this one, but maybe as we go.
But yes, Table Salt says, I told you, it's established in law. Aboriginal title makes your fee simple, title defeasible, meaning all of its protective armor is stripped away. Again, you show up with a paper and there's nothing on it.
And
does that sound okay to you?
And don't think because you live in Alberta and First Nations have ceded all their rights through these treaties that British Columbia tribes that haven't ceded their land aren't going to say their hunting territory used to be in Alberta. That's what they're saying within British Columbia, and this will force negotiations. And you need to separate before international law becomes even more favorable to these First Nations tribes.
But that, or they could come out and say, well, it was signed or it was ceded under duress. And then the whole issue gets even more muddled.
Well, when they say they signed it under duress, under no normal government, they wouldn't care. But with a liberal ideological government, and if Mark Carney gets a majority, if the First Nations said they signed those under duress, it's very likely Mark Carney might try to renegotiate that even before an Alberta independence vote.
Mm-hmm. I think, is this the clip you meant?
Yeah, this is it. And this is, he's very direct, and this is how people should address it.
From Kevin.
And it might be a little bit harsh, but
I acknowledge that I'm on permanently ceded territory as per Treaty 7. I bought this land. I own it. I have a deed for it. I was born in Alberta. I'm not a colonist nor a settler, and I couldn't care less whose ancestors wandered here 200 years ago. I owe them nothing.
That's why I say get rid of that guilt that was imposed upon you that is no longer usable. It's usable by them, but it shouldn't be enshrined upon you.
Yeah, and again, a lot of people don't put two and two together. They're thinking it's because British Columbian tribes didn't cede their land, but Albertan tribes have. No, this is going to come down to specialty groups and classes. Right now, it's coming up massively because the UN is trying to use First Nations and Aboriginals to kind of get rid of private property on a global basis and usher in a global government. But the canary in the coal mine for specialty groups wasn't actually First Nations, it was LGBTQ. And they cut their teeth and made their mistakes there as they wrote laws behind the scenes for Aboriginal and First Nation specialty groups. They're not going to make the same mistakes they did with the LGBTQ.
And because the West has allowed itself to be riddled with guilt that's no longer usable or workable or makes sense anymore, that's how they say, that's why they're able to do this. And that's why they're able to use it.
Oh, wait, let's take some comments.
Yes. Dylan Biver says, thanks.
And I thought we had a shorter show today, but I guess not.
Yeah, Dylan Biver says, thanks, Nat and Guy, great news. Well, hopefully great giving the news, but it's not great news that we're giving. Sorry. Joe Rush says, there is no escaping it. Government already knows everything about you. Phone number, address, children, maiden name, parents, and your history. They know everything. Yes, but as of right now, there's still some laws. I don't know if I would even say in Canada, but at least in the States, maybe. In Mexico, they're trying to get rid of them as well, that protect you against that kind of interference, even though they still do it anyways.
Well,
but
no,
the laws are there.
It's one thing if they know everything about you, but there's laws against them knowing it about you.
Or using it against you.
So, yeah. So if they're not allowed to know the things, but they know the things, that it's very hard for them to use it against you sometimes. That being said, this is what's so concerning about censorship laws in Canada. What you're going to see is the arresting of content creators that support Alberta independence. I firmly believe that's going to be one of their first targets, especially if Carney gets a majority government.
Under the guise of white nationalism.
We already left Canada. Alberta independence is a huge cause that I support, and we're going to continue to support on this channel. The fact that we don't live in Canada, the Canadian government doesn't necessarily have those levers over us like they would somebody that lives in Canada.
Mm-hmm. And Joe Rush also says, digital ID is coming. Yes. How are you going to stop it? I hate it, but not as much as I can. But not much I can do. Feel bad for grandchildren. Hopefully, I can help to stop it before my time is up. Well, it's coming before I think most of our time is up.
You would have been able to stop it before the censorship bill comes in. Next week, the censorship bill comes in. Then the other two censorship bills may come in short order after that. Because we cover geopolitics so heavily, we already know what happened in the UK, every single EU country or most of them, as well as Australia and the rest other than the United States. What they did was they first brought in censorship bills along with specialty groups, and that's what allowed them to bring in a digital ID for under 16-year-olds. Everybody had to, every 16-year-old, everybody under 16 had to ID to get online. Then they had to expand that out to everybody has to ID to get online so we can keep the children safe. Yeah. That's always the model they used in Australia, the UK, and these other countries.
Europe.
So it's the model Canada's going to use as well because they've learned from these other countries, just like I've learned by reporting on them. The first step is always going to be the censorship bill and specialty classes. Yep. Specialty classes is already a fundamental thing in Canada that's going to be hard to get rid of, but they needed the next level, which was censorship. Always the next level after censorship is protecting children in the guise of digital ID. I'm assuming after that is going to come digital currency.
Dara Robinson says, independent Alberta will be instantly better off. No federal tax, no carbon tax, no production cap, no GST, no gas tax, approximately 15 cents a liter. If you have not signed, please go sign the independence petition. Oh, and I forgot to mention it, but we do have the link below for where all the signing locations are, and it continues to get updated, or go to stayfreealberta.com.
Yeah, every single one of our edited videos, as well as our lives, always has that link. So if you need to sign the petition, just go there, or if a friend asks you where can they sign, just send them to that website.
And Joe Rush says, if you haven't already, research Brookfield and you will know more about Carney's interest. I did a whole deep dive for the Spanish channel on Carney, but still. And now there's that new website also that Mario for the North, I will call him, came up with also detailing Carney's to-dos.
Yeah. Also, I need to remember to say it once in a while, but if you're not subscribed, please do so. We're a small channel. Forget. We're growing because censorship is coming in hard in Canada because the censorship bill is going to be passed later this week. I'm extremely concerned what's going to happen. So if you can like, share, subscribe, everything really helps at this point before these censorship bills come in.
Mm-hmm. And Joe Rush says, no guilt here. My family arrived in 1634. Cool. And it was always funny to me when during protests at the art gallery and stuff, if I would try to talk to some of them or just walk by and they would yell settler, colonist. And I'm like, I'm from Mexico. And even my history in Mexico is very different from what you could ever call that.
Well,
but they never know.
One of the most outrageous things they did on the back of a specialty group in a First Nations was the group they used for this was during the truckers' protest in the Jibby Jab era. They said the protests were getting too big in favor of the truckers in downtown Vancouver. So they said, well, nobody can protest except for First Nations, and you have to have your First Nations identity card in order to protest. It was absolutely authoritarian. It's one thing if you say nobody can protest, that's bad enough. But then when you give specialty rights to one group, I'm like 136 Native American from the Choctaw Chickasaw in the United States. I never had my Native card, but when they implemented that, I sent for it. So now I have it. But
so they can't say anything.
It's crazy
to us. Canadian Spider-Man says, they know Jack S about me. I'm sneaky.
You're Spider-Man.
Yeah, and there's exactly. There's ways to kind of circumvent it, but at the end of the day, like I just accept they do, but at the same time, try me.
Well, it's going to take some people to kind of stand up like we have, and we've kind of insulated ourselves by talking about Canadian issues, but living outside of Canada. I think that gives us hopefully a level of protection. Some people can stand up on camera with their face and talk about the issues. Other people can remain anonymous in the comments or do other things. And financial support for organizations that like the Truckers Convoy or the March Across Canada.
But you get debanked in that case.
Yeah.
So that's the thing.
But some people that remain anonymous, but then can financially support people that can speak, that helps as well.
Jarraj says people should learn and uphold their constitutional rights, but too much ignorance, unfortunately. Yeah, and it doesn't get taught anymore either. Canadian Spider-Man says,
you don't really have constitutional rights in Canada.
That too, yeah. They're not settled.
There's a notwithstanding clause. So at any point in time, the Canadian government wants to take it away. You don't have any constitutional rights. That's why the American Constitution is a good document to really look at and say what's good, what's bad on that. But when Alberta is formed, you want hard constitutional rights, and it should be written in there. No matter what the national emergency is, these constitutional rights cannot be taken away or put on pause.
Or what the circumstance is where you're putting in a notwithstanding clause. Canadian Spider-Man says, let them bring all they want. Many of us are leaving either with Alberta or to another country. Our charter and constitution mean nothing, obviously. And I think they were, designed in a certain way for that.
Yeah.
So they're meaningless.
Yeah, if Alberta doesn't secede on independence, no other province is going to secede. I know Saskatchewan has an independence movement. They don't have the same leadership, number one, as Alberta. But number two, if the whatever the federal government is able to do to derail Alberta, it's going to do the exact same thing to anybody else that stands up. The one province that would normally have the chance because they have so many special privileges is Quebec. But the government is never going to let that happen because it's too much of their liberal voting base.
And Joe Rush says the last prime minister outright said he admires China, and the current one said that he wants to implement the new world order. So there you go.
And the last prime minister's dad was one of the founding members of the Club of Rome. So if you don't know what that is, check that up. That's a good rabbit hole to go down.
Then Joe and Canadian Spider-Man say moose is good. I'm guessing moose on the loose, they mean?
Yeah.
Okay. And Canadian Spider-Man says
we profiled moose on the loose.
We have a video about him.
I think usually we try every other video to profile a content creator. Recently we did Juno News, even though they're more of a national news organization but they give fair coverage to both the national side and the independent side. Not every news organization is going to support Alberta independence, but it's good to give the example of a news organization that does give balanced coverage, which the mainstream media is supposed to be doing. But Juno News does give fair and balanced coverage, which I do appreciate.
And Canadian Spider-Man also says, the jibby jab woke me up to how bad the government control here in Canada is.
Yeah,
it helped further my awakening, but I'd already kind of noticed it, but it did
it woke a lot of people up. And then there was a series of things during that they just kept stepping on your neck. So yeah, a lot of Canada woke up at that point, but a lot of those people that woke up left Canada because they didn't understand there was a way to change it. Alberta, luckily there's a consolidation of enough like-minded people that can stand up together and say, we're going to leave Canada together.
And Canadian Spider-Man says, what? Natives were allowed to protest while we weren't? Who in their right mind thought that was fair? That's it. I'm done. Out.
First, they're allowed to
Exactly.
protest.
And that was years ago.
And then they're allowed to take your land.
Exactly. Daryl Robinson says this property issue came from UN UNDRIP, exactly, a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That's what UNDRIP means. And that is not an elected body. I do not recognize their authority, so they can kiss my grits.
I think there's more infrastructure coming for this UNDRIP, and they're going to create a coordinated group probably within the UN of Aboriginals and First Nations people. And then they're going to create international law that will eventually supersede federal law. That's what they're hoping. And then that's how they get rid of private property rights altogether. But it's one step at a time, and they're very advanced in the steps they're taking, especially within British Columbia right now.
Nobody noticed.
Yeah, well, they're starting
Some
to
people,
notice.
yeah, now they are, but while they was starting to get implemented, nobody noticed. And Joe Rush says, absolutely. And let me just read quickly the RU and BLE ones. KP for you, hello, thank you for being here, says liberals are confused because they don't know the difference between men and women. That's when we were talking about they're trying to feminize men.
Yeah.
And also says the UN is going to use the natives to strip land rights away from their owners, then rug pull and take it back from the natives. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. It's not like they're trying to help the First Nations.
And that's how you get a one world government or a global government. So that was the hope for globalization, but Trump is kind of putting a monkey wrench in a lot of this stuff. I mean, the UN is almost bankrupt at a certain point, and they're trying to go after natural resource development in international waters and claiming they get a cut of that, and there has to be a tax paid to the UN for that. That's absolutely ridiculous. But they're going to start using First Nations to not only take private property rights, but endow a world government with it, most likely.
And that's why so many people have been propagandized to hate Donald Trump without even thinking. So,
yeah.
Because it's not beneficial to those that do the propagandizing. Speaking of propaganda, not propagandizing, of the United States, let's actually move on to that section. I think that'll be the last section, probably.
No.
But we'll see.
Okay.
And we're back. Starting with, and again, this is going to be pretty Iran heavy, but from Derek Evans, quote, White House confirms the U.S. Navy has not escorted any tanker through the Strait of Hormuz. Caroline Levitt says Energy Secretary Chris Wright's earlier post was removed quickly and called the claim incorrect.
Yeah, so they had made a post, then they took it down saying that they escorted a vessel. We're going to get into the fact that the Strait of Hormuz may be being mined right now by the Iranians. There's rumors of that as well. It's kind of up in the air if that's happening. But the reason this is important is because the City of London used to insure all oil freighters. And if you didn't have insurance, then you couldn't sell your oil freighter. The United States said they're going to now start insuring it and securing it with U.S. naval vessels. The problem is, even though they're willing to do that, no ship has passed through yet. At least it's not confirmed.
Can you explain why the Energy Secretary posted and appeared to have deleted a post on X saying that the U.S. Navy escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz?
Yes, I was made aware of this post. I haven't had a chance to talk to the Energy Secretary about it directly. However, I know the post was taken down pretty quickly, and I can confirm that the U.S. Navy has not escorted a tanker or a vessel at this time, though, of course, that's an option the president has said he will absolutely utilize if and when necessary at the appropriate time.
Yeah, and you have to realize a lot of people are probably saying, well, why don't they just escort the Navy vessel over? And if they shoot a missile or something, they can just shoot one back. They're going to send a bunch of drones, and the amount of missiles you're going to have to shoot ends up costing hundreds of millions of dollars in order to protect a vessel. And there's no guarantee a drone's not going to get through at that point. And because it's filled with oil, it doesn't take much to ba-boom.
But Trump said, quote, this is from Clash Report, quote, if Iran has put out any mines in the Hormuz Strait and we have no reports of them doing so, we want them removed immediately. If for any reason...
obviously, there's been reports, and it seems like they probably are.
If for any reason mines were placed and they are not removed forthwith, the military consequences to Iran will be at a level never seen before. If, on the other hand, they remove what may have been placed, it will be a giant step in the right direction. President DJT.
Trump wants this to be an in-and-out war probably within 4 weeks, because after 4 weeks, Congress has to vote on it, and he loses control of a lot of it, and then it can become a forever war. I don't think Trump wants that. That being said, Iran can't get a lot of their oil out right now, so if they can't get it out, well, nobody else is going to get out either, and they'll just mine the thing. It's very tricky to demine water, especially when you don't know where it is. This month is when typically over the last 3 years, the biggest strike has happened. That's in April, the ground thaws, and you're going to see a massive assault in Ukraine. That being said, a lot of Ukrainian weapons are being pulled back to Iran right now, and oil prices are through the roof. So that's also benefiting Russia. Very interestingly enough, Trump made a call to Russia the other day, and he hasn't talked to Russia since Vladimir Putin's personal residence had been bombed. So he hadn't talked to him since then. He called him. They were trying to he's trying to negotiate something to end the Iranian war. Vladimir Putin is the one world leader that has the best relations with the Iranian administration. They give him weaponry, intelligence, satellite imagery, and a lot of other things. Now, Iran has missile cities underground, and they've actually haven't hit back very much. They understand if they can take the barrage, take the attack, and not launch many missiles and save those missiles, when the United States does want to pull out, that gives them a lot of leverage over the United States. And their main leverage is by controlling the world's oil coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Sorry, I was going to give, we haven't talked about Iran in about a week, so there was a lot of information to give. But the phone call that went down between President Trump and Putin, supposedly it didn't go very well.
Why?
What happens with these phone calls is typically the Kremlin will put out a report of what was said in the phone call. The Duran always analyzes every Putin phone call. So he knows when they said it was a very forthright conversation. Usually they'll say it's a warm conversation, or there's certain language they'll use within the dialogue saying what was the context. And it was a very cold conversation, but they said it was productive. A lot of it was censored and everything wasn't put in there. So there was times they wanted to talk off of record as well.
And again, for those that say, well, it seems like the U.S. is going here and there and trying to go to Venezuela, then Iran, and now Cuba, who knows what they're doing. But if you look further into it, it is pretty much very connected. And it has to do with the multipolar powers that are at play.
Yeah, I don't think that justifies it. I don't agree with a forever war, and you can very easily get dragged into a forever war within Iran. That being said, if he can stop this thing before the 4-week mark, get some kind of peace negotiation, I'm more okay with that. It's going to turn a lot of his base against him if this turns into a forever war.
Well, I was just trying to segue into the next story. But
oh, you
yes.
were.
And this is all alleged, but still interesting. From Joshua Hall, quote, Trump administration in plea negotiations with former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who is reportedly cooperating to implicate top U.S. politicians of both parties who were on the Venezuela list and receiving millions of dollars in kickbacks from Maduro's narco-terrorist regime in exchange for letting illegal substances flow into the country. Maduro is being brilliantly used by Trump to get the big fish within the government. Good, lock them all up. Again, this is all alleged.
Well,
and hasn't been confirmed.
This is exactly what he needs to do with Maduro for two main reasons. Number one, the big Achilles heel of Donald Trump has been the Epstein files. Now, he says he's released them all, but he said that a dozen times. At this point, he's the boy that cried wolf. It's going to hurt him in the midterms to some degree, but if he's able to get prosecutions and names from Maduro, that's going to be big. Also, why it's big is because a lot of people don't know, but when Maduro first got arrested, those first couple months after that, I was researching very hard, and the case against him is extremely, extremely weak. I was shocked how weak the case was. You just assume it's an open and shut case. Not at all. Most of the case brought by Maduro was actually brought before the Trump administration, and they reopened the same case, and it was given to the same judge. That judge has major TDS. And
he's really old.
He's extremely old. And on top of that, oh God, where was I going to go with that?
Sorry.
That's all right.
The case that they had brought against him.
Oh yeah, it's just an extremely weak case. I talked about it on a few episodes when I was first deep diving into it. But a lot of the accusations they're making against him is not going to stand up, because they're saying he was working with certain cartels and certain organizations within the country. The problem was, when those initial charges were laid, those organizations didn't even exist within the country. So
However, and allegedly, this whole news is allegedly, while a lot of people are focusing on what might be happening to U.S. politicians, if Maduro is opening his big mouth and starting to say things, a lot of people, a lot of important big fish implicated within this are within the governments of important countries within Latin America, like Mexico, like Brazil, like Cuba, like a bunch of other ones that have been in this dictatorial party with each other and helping each other out to continue and furthering these regimes, especially when it comes to oil. In Mexico, we have a huge illegal, illicit oil moving around of oil within Mexico, but also going towards places like Venezuela, but also China and other places where they're paying top dollar for it. And a lot of our politicians have been implicated within that. But in Mexico, it is pretty hard to get those convictions and to actually open up those cases. So another leverage point that this gives to Trump is with Mexico and a lot of the other countries that he's trying to better or go into.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot more arrests and flipping on people from Central and South America. And there's a huge focus on that with this administration for the first time, probably in American history.
And with the Shield of the Americas and all of the more right-wing common sense people that went, presidents that went to that meeting and signed it, it does make it a lot more clear that, yes, even though right now they're in Iran, etc., might be leaving soon, I won't say will, the Western Hemisphere doctrine is the one that they're trying to implement.
Well, and this massively affects oil prices within all Central and South American countries. Venezuela is not the only oil-rich country. Mexico is as well.
And they've done a huge mess with their own oil, with our own oil.
Okay, let's move on there, though. But that was a big story as well today.
But speaking of oil, from Marianoffel, China now controls 7.27% of Iraq's oil and gas projects. American companies hold less than 2%. The U.S. spent trillions and thousands of lives in Iraq. China walked in with a checkbook and took the oil. This is why the Iran war matters. Whoever controls energy controls the next century. And Venezuela and Mexico and etc.
And the same thing happened with Afghanistan. Trillions of dollars were spent there. Then they walked out. The Chinese walked in with their pocketbook, and now they're running their natural resource sector that is there, and the Taliban are running the country.
And that's also what they attempted to do within Latin America. Now they've been kicked out of a lot of countries. China has, but they're also very, very invested within Africa. So.
Of course, Trump was right. And into the vacuum, China is always happy to step in. And they have. Today, China is the largest foreign investor and operator in Iraqi oil production, both in terms of project share and strategic involvement in developing fields. The percentage comparison, well, China to the United States is stunning. S&P Global estimates that Chinese companies operate 7.
And another reason this story is very important is all of Iraq's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz as well. So, but we're going to give a story in a moment. China's not as in bad trouble yet as they could be. So let's keep watching here.
0.27% of Iraq's oil and gas development projects, the largest slice of any country besides Iraq. American companies own less than 2%. So we cannot let this same dynamic develop in Iran after the hostilities wrap, despite China's previous investments there, of course, and continued oil dependence. Now, for this reason, President Trump is not going to take...
Okay, and you can leave it there. And let's go right into the next story because they're related and it has to do with Chinese oil. I believe. Hopefully it's the right story.
Yes. From Baron Trump, but this is not actual Baron Trump. Quote, holy smokes, President Trump just triggered one of the most epic oil price reversals in recent memory after making it crystal clear that the United States will respond with overwhelming force to any attempt to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Reports are already coming in that tankers are preparing to move through the strait again after the panic started to fade. Wholesale gas prices are already plummeting, dropping more than 50 cents in just 24 hours as markets realize the situation isn't spiraling out of control. Everyone who panicked yesterday is suddenly very quiet. Strength and clear warnings from President Trump changed the entire equation overnight.
And again, there was false reports coming out that a tanker had been escorted through it. That has not yet happened. Potentially, Iran is looking to mine the strait. I don't know how easy that's going to be to do. That was not the article. The article is actually in the Asian section if we manage to get there today. Yes. But basically, I talk a little bit about it. All the oil that was in the midst of being shipped around the world from Iran, from the Strait of Hormuz, and from other sources like Russia and Venezuela are currently sitting off of the coast of China. And it's at an extremely high oil price right now. So China's trying to negotiate a lower price. But there is millions upon millions of barrels just sitting in tankers off of China right now. So they do have access, if they need it, to a lot of oil. So it's going to take more than 4 weeks. And this is one of the considerations why I don't agree with the conflict if it does go more than 4 weeks.
But I will also say that within this whole context and within the oil wars that we're still in, Alberta is positioned very, very good if it manages to become independent, when it manages to become independent and continue and deepen that relation with the United States, because it opens up so many more doors than that Canada is closing shut right now and is not realizing the state of the world apparently either, and how oil is still very important.
Yeah, especially because they're ideologically aligned with Trump. So countries that are ideologically aligned have been getting fantastic deals. And we see Alberta has good trade relations with Donald Trump. Canada's not able to have that same relationship because they're ideologically just at an absolute impasse. They want to align with China, but they can't do it quite yet outright because he believes he can't win a majority government if he does align himself with China.
But right now, all of the power players, all of this, the power play that's going on is regarding oil. So again, Alberta, you're sitting on top of it.
This is great for Alberta. Even if people at the pump are paying a little bit more in Alberta right now, this is going to benefit you long term.
Do you want me to play that video or no?
Oh, what video was it?
From what I just read.
No, you can kind of leave it. We'll go into the next story just because we're running short on time a little bit.
Yes. Moving on from Nick's orator, quote, "It's official. A federal judge has restricted ISIS tear gas use against violent rioters at their Portland facility. The same group of rioters who have attempted multiple times to raid the facility and even held agents hostage and fired shots as well."
And this is an update on a day that we actually did live protest. I think it was a year ago now in the summertime. And we were expecting big protests and they weren't that big. So we shut down after I think 3 hours of live coverage. And then I went to bed. But while I was sitting in bed, I was like, let me check. And then this Portland facility, ICE facility, came up. And ever since that day, they've had people protesting this ICE facility. And nothing goes on there. I mean, vehicles come in and out, but it's nothing major is happening there. Yeah. But they have these crazy protesters there that are taking people hostage and everything else. Yet now the state government is saying you can't use tear gas, which is non-lethal. This is what you get in a sanctuary state.
Well, a judge in Oregon has put new limits on federal agents' use of tear gas and other crowd control weapons during protests outside the ICE building in Portland. The ruling comes after the ACLU of Oregon filed a lawsuit claiming federal officers using chemical munitions violates First Amendment rights. Witnesses at the hearing include this one, a protester known for wearing a chicken costume at rallies. The judge who issued the preliminary injunction mentioned pepper spray, also known as OC spray, in his written opinion, quote, "Videos show DHS officers spraying OC spray directly into the faces of peaceful."
And pause it for a minute. And the reason they're dressing up in these blow-up costumes is because they used to dress up as Antifa in Black Bloc, and it didn't have a good image when it made to the mainstream press. So they've been telling their protesters to dress up in like non-threatening costumes.
Well, some still dress in Black Bloc.
Even if they're going to do violent actions, it makes it harder to build a narrative against them. At least that's their thinking.
Engaged in, at most, passive resistance. Defendants' conduct physically harming protesters and journalists without prior dispersal warnings is objectively chilling. And Emily, he's making those objectively chilling remarks in reference to the First Amendment rights of.
If you just Google what's happening in the Portland facility, but it's very, very clear that they want them dead. They want law and order dead, and they're going to continue to do what they can to actually see officers ended.
Well, that's just a couple stages in it, but if you let that kind of ideology progress, what happens is what you had here in Mexico, which is Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of the country, comes out and says, we can't go after the cartels because they have human rights. We can't violate their human rights. And all the while, the cartels are violating regular citizens' human rights on a daily basis.
Killing people all the time. It's insane, but it is where that ideology gets you. But at the same time, it is the reversal of what actual law and order means and trying to get rid of it. And that's not how a country can function properly. But now I'll read your comments because we're at the end of the section. Canadian Spider-Man is asking Darryl Robinson, Alice Flo, loved that show, Mel's Diner, because he said a phrase. Canadian Spider-Man also says that was like 45 years ago. Yeah, it was before my time. Darryl Robinson says, you guys are spot on. No insurance, no tanker movement. Boom, time for Alberta. Right now, it's the time to leave the dumpster fire as Alberta becomes a safe source and the best option.
Yeah. And I will say again, just to, because we had quite a few people watch our geopolitics. It's every Tuesday we do geopolitics. We cover a lot of Canada, a lot of Alberta, but then we go into the rest of the world. Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, it's usually all about Alberta. And then we do one edited video on Alberta independence every day.
Yes. Joe Rush says, I like that you corrected yourself and said when Alberta becomes independent. It's an important correction because it will happen.
Yeah.
And then they're talking about a TV show. Let me see it.
And I did see an interview with Mitch Sylvester today, and he didn't say how many signatures they have or how many they think he has, but he seems to be in a good mood. And based upon Marty Up North's estimations, I think we're in a pretty good place right now.
But again, don't get complacent.
Yeah.
Don't think it's done. And it's not done until it's done. It's not done until Alberta's independent.
And I will say this, Mitch Sylvester did come out and said if the court says they can continue to gather signatures, they're going to continue to do that. So they don't have to submit them before that point.
That's good.
Yeah, so which is a good thing.
But let's move on to another crazy dystopia that is essentially just doing the same thing Canada is, which is the European Union. We're back. And yes, literally starting with a dystopic story from the UK government. From Basel, the great UK government publishes Islamophobia law and appoints Minister of Islamophobia. We live in truly insane times. All this does is prove multiculturalism has been an absolute disaster and people are sick of Islam.
And again, this is another example of a specialty group, a specialty class. They start bringing in hate speech laws. They start bringing in compelled speech laws. They're trying to bring in Sharia laws as well, which is an alternative system of governance, which shouldn't be able to exist alongside the UK government. But just like in British Columbia, it's just a slightly tweaked model, but same thing.
Today, we are publishing our definition of anti-Muslim hatred and hostility. And this is in response to what we have heard loud and clear from the Muslim community. 45% of the hate crime that we're seeing in this country is targeted our Muslim communities. And we know that people are anxious, they're scared, they're worried.
What about the 20 years of people raping young women and girls within Britain? Was that not hate? Was that not hate directed towards a specific group?
Well, and this is obviously the liberal pitch for their censorship laws and their specialty group laws. There's all kinds of rights they're going to be able to violate against other groups on the back of this specialty
against
group.
Their own citizens, the actual native population of Britain.
Defining what is going on is the first step to taking action, but the definition must sit alongside action in order to make sure that we are protecting people in this country and that we're also tackling those that want to sow hate and those that want to intimidate. And that's why we will be appointing an anti-Muslim hostility czar to work alongside government to make sure that we are rolling this out in institution after institution and taking the robust action we need to make sure that everyone in our country feels protected.
Okay, and that's good. And they're going to put
women and girls don't feel protected.
Don't turn that post off.
Okay.
They're going to bring these laws into institution after institution after institution because they can strip different groups' rights within each institution and get people in line for their ideology they want to impose on everybody. Bring that clip back up real quick. Let's go down to the comments. There was a good comment I seen if it's still there.
Okay. That one?
No, keep going down. Keep going down. Okay. There. Go up. Yeah, that one right there. So they want to give specialty protections to the Muslims, but in general, what happens? You hate Jews, you hate Christians, you hate atheists, you hate gays, you hate dogs. They definitely hate dogs. Hate bacon, hate wine, hate beer, hate civilization, your culture, your traditions, your country, and you. Complains about Islamophobia. Like, it's so true. That group imposes so much hate on other groups, yet you want to give that specific group protections.
And actual violence against women and girls.
But it doesn't stop with that group. All those other groups, they want to give protections to too.
Yeah.
So they can strip, because then they can use the protections against each group and just divide society into all these little segmented classes.
However, some tiny sectors within Europe might be waking up. From Charlie Weimers says, quote, Europe is waking up. Those who do not have a right to stay will be deported. Tonight's vote in the European Parliament solidifies a historic deal among
and this is not the case, but this is how, again, the EU is going to pitch it. There's too many levels of government in the EU, and they want to strip sovereignty. They're trying to pitch to the people right now. They're cleaning up immigration. They're absolutely not. It's embedded in the law, and it's going to be almost impossible to reform that.
Like in Canada.
Same within Canada. He's actually slowed down the immigration, but he slowed it down because he's in negotiations with Trump.
He increased it too.
He's actually slowed it down to almost a near stop this year. That being said, he's implementing laws so he can make up for lost time in 2027 and 2028.
But he increased immigration in sectors like students, specifically students from from India, in Canada, I mean. Sorry.
Yeah, please, you can go ahead. All right, questions, but please state your major outlet in your name.
Or you want to give a... I could just give a short statement. Tonight, the European Parliament sends a very clear signal that we cannot have a functioning migration policy where people who should not be in the EU are allowed to remain. A majority in the Libe Committee, consisting of the ECR, EPP, Patriots, and ESN, have now shown leadership in suggesting a proposal which will go through the trilogue.
But he's saying we're trying to pass a law where people that shouldn't be here won't be here. The problem is they've made illegal migration illegal. So it's all legalized now. So it's a very small demographic of people that actually meet the definition of illegal immigrant because they've put in so many laws to legalize immigration. It's absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm. And more insane ideas that they've had.
And this will be the last one for the EU.
Okay. Throughout the years, the witch, Ursula von der Leyen, from Marinov, EU Chief von der Leyen on their nuclear power failures, saying that, well, I'll just play it. Is it in English?
Yeah, and this goes back to this green energy scam and how they tore down all their nuclear facilities. And now nuclear is really the way forward. China and the United States are both going headfirst into small and large nuclear and fusion reactors.
Mm-hmm. The nuclear story, unfortunately, is different. And you described why. While in 1990, 1/3 of Europe's electricity came from nuclear, today, it's only close to 15%.
And pause it. That's a very important number because it seems like, we still have some. No, but Western Europe tore down all their nuclear. It's the Eastern Europe that didn't buy into a lot of this ideology and couldn't afford to go down the green path, kept their nuclear facilities. It would have been at zero if the EU had its way.
Reduction in the share of nuclear was a choice. And in hindsight, it was a strategic mistake for Europe to turn its back on a reliable, affordable source of low-emission power.
Dangerous and dirty is what they called it for years as they destroyed their best source of power.
Of energy.
We'll go into Australia really quick. Okay. There's two stories, but they're the same story. It's just an update.
Okay. But we do have a thing that goes off. Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to make some sort of similar buttons for when we talk about Alberta so we can divide it a bit better. Because if you're watching it on the replay, you can always go to the specific segment that you want to watch when we have these chapter dividers.
This was a big story, and Donald Trump is the one that made this happen. Let's go into it.
From Baron Trump, quote, "It's official. Australia just granted asylum to any Iranian women's soccer player who wants to seek refuge after they stood up to the Islamic regime and refused to stay silent. These women defied the regime and demanded their rights, and President Trump stepped in immediately to defend them."
So if you don't know what happened here, you can leave your headphones off for a moment. If you don't know what happened here, the Iranian women's soccer team went to play a game. They refused to sing the Iranian national anthem. And then Australia was going to send them back. They said they weren't going to give them refugee status. Trump came out with a tweet saying, "We'll give them refugee status. They're going to be killed if you send them back." That put a ton of pressure on the Australian government, at which point they offered asylum. 5 of the players took asylum, I believe, and the other 5 were bussed out today. And we can go to the second story. Okay. They're related. We're running out of time, so I just wanted to cover both sides of the story real quick.
From Fox News, quote, "Save Our Girls" fans attempt to block the Iranian women's soccer team from leaving their Australian hotel.
You don't have to play the video. I just want to...
fearing the players would face punishment upon returning to Iran after players refused to sing their national anthem ahead of a recent game. Witnesses said one player was dragged by her collar and shirt to force her on board, while others appeared to make SOS signals indicating they did not want to leave Australia.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the case. They offered to whoever wanted asylum. I think the girls that went back because they were scared of what would probably happen to their families in Iran if they didn't go back. We have one more story. This involves China. It's a fairly big story. It was the one I was talking about earlier. And then we're going to head over to RUMBLE.
But first, I'll read all your comments after this last Asia story. Okay, we'll do this quickly. From Marian Alfal as well says, quote, nearly 40 million barrels of sanctioned crude are now sitting on tankers off of China's coast. 30.2 million barrels from Iran, 5.6 million from Venezuela, 3.5 million from Russia. Most of it is parked near China's main refining hubs in the Yellow Sea, floating buffer for China's teapot refiners buying discounted sanctioned oil. China can wait, the oil is already there.
Yeah, so they have, if anybody thinks there's incredible pressure being put on China right now, it's not. There's a lot of oil there. So it's going to take a lot more than 4 weeks to put real pressure onto China, especially because they know this could last longer. I don't really think it's going to last longer in Iran. That being said, they're definitely not using as much oil as they normally would. So, and they're trying to cut a deal on the price they're going to pay for those oil tankers right now. Okay, let's read the comments, then we'll go to RUMBLE. Thanks for everybody that tuned into our geopolitics. I like doing geopolitics a lot because we get to kind of review what's going on in the entire world and how it relates to
because it's important for people to be aware of not just their little bubble, but that everything is connected at the end of the day.
Tomorrow, again, we're going to be back with a purely Alberta independence show and updates on what's going on there.
Canadian Spider-Man says, great analysis, both of you. Thank you. It says, we appreciate it and catch when you correct yourselves. Thanks for being genuine. There we go. We try, and if not, you can always find, if we do have any corrections, I always put them in the comments after a live or after a video if we find out more information or have to correct ourselves.
Yeah.
Because the mainstream media doesn't do that. And that is part of the problem. Canadian Spider-Man says, it will happen because it's our last shot at freedom, seeing how this country is going.
Absolutely.
When I said when it happens, yes.
Absolutely. And that's why we do a show 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because they're going to try to derail this at every single point. And it's going to be crucially important for independent media to report on what's going on in a timely manner to kind of counter their narrative or counter whatever they're doing. When we're going to talk more about it tomorrow, but the Fringe is trying to organize a counter protest against that union. And it's the first union that's kind of being, I think they're being federally funded to kind of derail the Alberta independence movement. And it's a shame it's coming from a union.
But yeah, it's important to have that information to counteract it because new things pop up every day, especially now with the censorship bill and also the First Nations injunction that they're trying to do, etc. Joe Rush says, I personally laugh at the hate. Someone will hate you for something or they will create a reason. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the people that take it seriously need to find a better way to deal with their lives. Canadian Spider-Man says, where the hell is Chuck Norris? Send him in. And also says, I got excited. Sorry, probably don't read that last one. Sorry, I did read it. Darryl Robinson says, please sign the independence petition ASAP, I guess it would say. But yes, exactly. Yeah. And again, if you need to know where the locations are, it's in the description or go to stayfreealberta.com.
Yeah, and
you can find it there.
Just thinking about that last story with China, I know Mark Carney if he builds any pipeline, he's going to try to throw a goodie bag of pipelines and mineral contracts at Alberta if this independence movement goes too far for him. But the pipeline he's going to want built is the one to China. So he's going to want to build that to the West Coast so China has access because those are his puppet masters. The thing is, if Alberta gets its independence and builds its own pipeline to the coast, it can choose who gets that oil. And Japan has been begging for that oil. And it's a absolutely fantastic partner to have. So you don't have to give it to China. But if you do it under Mark Carney, he's going to force all that oil over to China.
Yeah, and that's why they only talk about the economics when they debate the issue of Alberta independence. KP for you says, love the show. Thank you. Says,
thank you.
You're the best podcast. Going to buy you a tequila coffee once I figure it out. Thank you. You don't have to. But thank you so much. And we try, but we also always like to admit that we don't know everything. We know less than we know more. And we do like to correct ourselves.
We're just two citizens that really got fed up with the Canadian government, and they pushed us to our absolute limit. And I'm glad we left when we did, because looking at what's happening now, they're going way past what my limit ever was. Who knows what I would have done. That being said, now the fact that we're in Mexico, we can speak freely even when these censorship laws come in. So once these censorship laws come in, if you notice other content creators in Canada are self-censoring, it's because they don't want to be arrested. We will still be speaking freely on this channel. And hopefully a lot of those content creators, if they're too scared to speak living in Canada, we can interview them anonymously.
Yeah, we want to have that, open up that space for anybody that wants to speak on this. Right now we're a small channel, so it is harder to get people to interview or to notice. But eventually we are growing thanks to you, and the whole goal and point of it is to do exactly that and to help push the Alberta independence movement forward as much as we can.
Yeah, if you're not subscribed, please do so. It really does help.
Yeah, and I will say just that line that they crossed us into a line where we wanted to just know more and get more information and actually find more sources and more, just know more, because that is how you fight back, by not being propagandized.
They kind of activated me into politics, because it took almost 4 years to save up the money to leave, but all my jobs were different security jobs or where I could have headphones in, and all I did was listen to politics. I literally worked 15 to 16-hour days because I was working 2 jobs back to back, and it was just politics, and that's how I got educated. So when I left, it's like, well, I have an educated base to kind of talk about this.
Yes, but thank you so much, KP.
And fight back against Canada.
Exactly. Thank you so much, KP, for the comment. Okay, now we are heading over to Aryo and Billy, because even though we want to speak freely, YouTube doesn't like certain stories and topics, so we cover them there. You can follow us there. The username is Nat and the Guy.
And I think we got 3 stories over there, so it should be pretty good.
Yes, so we'll see you there in a second.